Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into a mystery that's nearly 5,000 years old. Picture this, you're standing on a sun-baked plain. The air thick with the scent of dust and the distant murmur of a great river. Around you rise the brick-built skeletons of cities so ancient. They were thriving when the pyramids of Giza were still relatively new. This is the realm of the Indus Valley Civilization, a world bustling with life, trade, and an ingenious system of symbols that, to this day, remains stubbornly silent. We're going on a quest to understand their lost words, their silent script. And just a heads up, if you were actually transported back there. With their unique customs and, shall we say, vintage approach to public health, you probably won't survive this. It's a fascinating place to visit in your mind, but maybe not for a long-term stay. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe channel, History for Sleep, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really does help the channel grow and allows me to keep unearthing these sleepy stories for you. Oh, and if you're up for it, drop a comment letting us all know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always cool to see how far these historical whispers travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself stepping back, way back, to a time around 2600 BCE. You're in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, a vast expanse of fertile land cradled by the mighty Indus River and its network of tributaries. This isn't a desolate, empty landscape. Instead, you find yourself on the outskirts of a city, a metropolis of baked brick that stretches further than your eye can comfortably see. This is the Indus Valley Civilization, or the Harappan civilization as it's also known, named after Harappa, one of the first major sites to be excavated. For a long time, the world, or at least the Western academic world, thought that civilization in South Asia began much later. Then, in the 1920s, a series of archaeological discoveries, spearheaded by figures like Sir John Marshall, R.D. Banerjee, and Daya Ram Sahni, dramatically rewrote the history books. Suddenly, here was a civilization as old, as vast, and in many ways as sophisticated as those in Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. It was like finding a hidden continent in the annals of human achievement. As you approach one of its great urban centers, perhaps Mohenjo-daro, the Mound of the Dead, you'd be struck by the sheer order of it all. Forget the higgledy-piggledy layout of many ancient, and some modern, towns. These cities were often planned with an almost unnerving precision. Streets laid out in a grid pattern, some remarkably wide, others narrower, forming neat rectangular blocks. You'd see houses, many of them 2 or even 3 stories high, built from standardized baked bricks, a testament to their mass production capabilities. Think of it, thousands of years ago, they had standardized brick sizes. If you've ever tried to build anything with mismatched Legos, you'll appreciate the genius of this. It's a simple thing, but it speaks volumes about their level of organization. You wander down a main street, the sun beating down. The walls of the houses are mostly plain, no grand carvings or colorful frescoes facing the public thoroughfare. It's a practical, perhaps even modest, exterior. But step inside one of these homes, and you might find a different story. Courtyards open to the sky, rooms arranged for ventilation and privacy. And here's where things get really impressive. Many houses had their own bathrooms and connections to a sophisticated, city-wide drainage system. Covered drains ran beneath the streets, carrying wastewater away. This level of civic sanitation was unparalleled in the ancient world. The famous Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro, a large, watertight public bathing pool, remains a marvel of engineering. You can almost smell the slightly damp, earthy aroma of the fired bricks and the faint, mineral tang from the water systems. It's a far cry from the open sewers common elsewhere for millennia to come. You probably wouldn't want to drink the water straight from the tap, mind you, but for its time, it was revolutionary. Who were these people, these master planners and builders? We don't have grand statues of their kings or queens, no boastful inscriptions proclaiming their mighty deeds in battle. The iconic priest-king statuette, a small, steatite figure of a bearded man with a calm, introspective gaze, wearing an embroidered robe, is one of the few human representations we have that feels like portraiture. But was he a priest? A king? Or just a very well-dressed citizen with excellent posture? We simply don't know. This lack of monumental art glorifying rulers or warfare is one of the civilization's most intriguing aspects. Compared to the grand ziggurats of Mesopotamia or the colossal tombs of Egyptian pharaohs, the Indus cities seem almost humble in their public presentation of power. This has led to a lot of head-scratching among scholars. Historians still argue whether the Indus Valley Civilization was a collection of egalitarian city-states, a loosely confederated empire governed by a merchant class, or perhaps a society ruled by priests. The general absence of obvious palaces, grand temples dedicated to specific, named gods, and extensive weaponry or fortifications, though some cities did have walls, paints a picture of a society that perhaps valued order and trade more than conquest and overt displays of individual power. Or maybe they were just really good at subtle power structures that archaeologists haven't quite figured out how to identify. It's like trying to understand a modern city by only looking at its fire hydrants and parking meters, useful, but not the whole story. You'd see workshops buzzing with activity. Potters shaping clay on fast wheels, their creations ranging from simple, everyday vessels to beautifully painted wares adorned with geometric designs, animals, and plants. Metalworkers were highly skilled, casting tools, ornaments, and statuettes in copper and bronze. The famous dancing girl of bronze, a small, slender figure full of life and attitude, is a masterpiece of their metallurgical art. Goldsmiths and beadmakers produced exquisite jewelry from gold, silver, carnelian, agate, and other semi-precious stones. These weren't just for local adornment. Indus beads have been found as far away as Mesopotamia, a testament to their far-reaching trade networks. Imagine the clinking and scraping sounds from these artisan quarters, the smell of kilns firing pottery, the glint of polished carnelian beads. Now, amidst all this evidence of a sophisticated, thriving culture, the well-planned cities, the advanced crafts, the widespread trade, there's a persistent, tantalizing mystery scattered throughout these sites. Archaeologists have found thousands of small, square or rectangular objects, mostly made of steatite, soapstone. These are the Indus seals. Each one is intricately carved with figures of animals, humped bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, and most famously, a creature that looks like a unicorn, alongside a short string of symbols. These symbols, these tiny, elegant pictograms and abstract signs, constitute the Indus script. You'd see them on these seals, but also inscribed on miniature tablets of terracotta or faience, on pottery, on copper tools, even on ivory rods. They are everywhere, yet they are completely silent. What do they say? Are they names? Titles? Religious incantations? Trade information? Jokes about the neighbor's noisy chariot? That's the multi-million-dollar question, or perhaps, given the time frame, the multi-zebu question. We have around 400 unique signs, give or take. Which is too many for an alphabet, like English, with 26 letters, and too few for a purely logographic system, like Chinese, with thousands of characters. This suggests it might be a logosyllabic script, a mix of signs representing whole words and signs representing syllables, much like ancient Sumerian or Mayan. But that's just an educated guess. One quirky tidbit that always fascinates researchers is the ubiquity of the unicorn motif. This one-horned animal, often depicted with a ceremonial object or incense burner before it, is by far the most common image on the seals. Was it a mythical creature, a symbol of a powerful clan or deity, or perhaps a stylized representation of an aurochs or bull seen in profile? Some even speculate it could relate to a constellation. Whatever it was, it clearly held significant meaning for the Indus people. Trying to figure out the unicorn is almost as maddening as trying to read the script next to it. It's like they left behind a beautifully illustrated book with all the text written in invisible ink. The script itself is usually very concise. Most inscriptions are just 4 or 5 signs long. The longest continuous text found on a single surface is only about 17 signs. And a more disputed one up to 26 signs. This brevity has led some to wonder if it's even a true writing system capable of recording complex language. Could it be a system of proto-writing? Like symbols for families, officials, or goods, not unlike heraldry or trademarks. Most scholars lean towards it being a linguistic script, but the debate, like the script itself, is far from settled. For nearly 700 years, from around 2600 BCE to 1900 BCE, this civilization flourished, maintaining a remarkable uniformity in its culture, its crafts, and its mysterious script across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Imagine the intellectual effort. The societal organization required to develop and sustain such a system of communication over centuries and across hundreds of miles. And then, like a slowly dimming light, the cities began to decline. The script, which had been so consistent, starts to show less uniformity, perhaps even simplification, before it vanishes altogether. Why it disappeared is another puzzle. Probably linked to the decline of the civilization itself, perhaps climate change, shifts in river courses, disease, or internal societal pressures. We'll delve into those fading whispers later. But for now, as you stand in the imagined twilight of an Indus city, the sounds of life fading into the evening, you're surrounded by these enigmatic symbols. They are on the seals that merchants once pressed into clay to mark their goods, on the amulets people wore, on the pots they used. Each one a tiny, locked treasure chest of meaning. They are the last direct messages from this incredible lost world. They tantalize us with the promise of understanding who these people were, what they believed, how they saw their world. And for almost a century now, since these curious marks were first seriously studied, the best minds have tried to pick that lock. The challenge is immense. No Rosetta Stone has ever been found, no bilingual text that could provide a key. The inscriptions are too short. We don't even know for sure what language family the underlying words might belong to. It's like trying to solve the hardest crossword puzzle ever devised, but without any clues. And you don't even know what language the answers are in. It makes today's encrypted files look like child's play. At least with those, you know there is a key. And probably a disgruntled IT guy who set the password to password 123. The Indus people were, it seems, much better at keeping their secrets. But the quest continues. Because those little signs are more than just ancient graffiti. They are the ghosts of a language. The echoes of thoughts and ideas from a civilization that laid many of the foundations for later cultures in the subcontinent. Unlocking them wouldn't just be an academic triumph. It would be like hearing voices from a world we thought was lost forever. And that, my friends, is the journey we are on tonight, to explore the attempts, the theories, the frustrations, and the enduring hope surrounding the unsolved mystery of the Indus Valley script. So, you're standing in this imagined Indus city, surrounded by these tiny, tantalizing symbols, the silent script of a lost world. The desire to understand them, to hear what these people had to say, is almost overwhelming. It's a desire that has gripped archaeologists and linguists for the better part of a century. Ever since these strange little marks began to surface from beneath the dust of millennia. The first glimpses of this enigmatic script actually came much earlier than the main excavations of the 1920s. Picture Major General Alexander Cunningham, the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, a keen explorer of ancient sites in the mid to late 19th century. During his visits to Harappa in the 1850s and again in 1872–73, he stumbled upon a few of these small, square steatite seals, engraved with the familiar animal motifs and the mysterious script. Now, Cunningham was a brilliant man, a pioneer in Indian archaeology. But even he was initially a bit stumped by these. He published an image of one, noting its unknown script and the distinct bull, though it was more of a unicorn type depicted. He couldn't place it. He even, rather amusingly in hindsight, speculated that it might be of foreign origin, or perhaps a very early form of Brahmi script, which is the ancestor of many modern Indian scripts but dates from a much later period. It's a bit like finding an advanced smartphone in an ancient Roman ruin and speculating it's just a particularly shiny, unusually shaped abacus. This is our quirky tidbit for this section. The script was literally in the hands of archaeologists decades before its true significance was understood. The seals were seen, noted, and then, for a while, largely relegated to the category of interesting, but we have no idea what this is. It wasn't until the large-scale excavations at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro began in the early 1920s that the sheer quantity of these inscribed objects came to light, and the realization dawned that they belonged to a vast, hitherto unknown Bronze Age civilization. Suddenly, Cunningham's strange little seal wasn't an anomaly. It was a key piece of a colossal puzzle. Thousands upon thousands of these inscribed artifacts started emerging from the earth, and with them, the script moved from a mere curiosity to a central focus of intense study. So, what do these objects, the carriers of these first glyphs, actually look like? Imagine holding one of the classic Indus seals in your palm. It's surprisingly small, typically a square of steatite, a type of soapstone. About an inch to an inch and a quarter on each side, maybe the size of a large postage stamp, but thicker. The stone itself is soft and easy to carve, but the Harappans usually fired these seals, making them harder and more durable. On the reverse, you'd find a perforated boss, a little raised lump with a hole through it, clearly designed so it could be threaded onto a string, perhaps worn around the neck or wrist, or attached to a bundle of goods. The business end, the flat surface of the seal, is where the artistry lies. It's carved in intaglio, meaning the design is cut into the stone. This is important because these seals were not meant to be read directly from the stone itself. They were designed to be pressed into a soft material like clay, creating a positive, raised impression, a seal impression, or sealing. This immediately tells you something about their function. They were for marking things, authenticating ownership, or perhaps authorizing transactions, much like signet rings or cylinder seals in other ancient cultures. You can almost feel the cool, smooth surface of the fired steatite, the precise, tiny grooves of the carvings under your fingertip. While the square seals with animal motifs and script are the most iconic, they're not the only place you'll find these symbols. Archaeologists have unearthed a fascinating variety of other inscribed objects. There are tiny rectangular tablets made of steatite, terracotta, or faience, a sort of early glazed earthenware. Some of these tablets have script on one side and an animal motif on the other, others have script on multiple sides. Some inscriptions are impressed, others incised. There are even triangular terracotta tablets, and some that are long and thin, like little sticks. It's as if they were experimenting with different formats for different kinds of information, or maybe some were amulets, others labels, perhaps even some kind of tiny, pocket-sized instruction manual for assembling flat-pack Bronze Age furniture, probably not that last one, but who knows. You also find the script, or at least individual signs or short sequences, scratched onto the surface of pottery. These are often called graffiti, but that doesn't mean they were idle doodles. They could have been ownership marks, indications of the pot's contents, or perhaps the potter's identifying mark. It's like finding a single, cryptic letter stamped on the bottom of an ancient mug, intriguing, but not very chatty. More rarely, the script appears on copper tablets, which are quite special because they are among the few examples of the script on a more permanent, potentially official medium. There are also inscribed ivory or bone rods and even a large signboard found near a gateway at Dhalavira, one of the larger Indus cities, though its script was made of inlaid gypsum, which is quite unique. Now, let's zoom in on the script itself. As you peer closely at these inscriptions, you'll notice the elegance and precision of the characters. There are, as we mentioned, around 400 to 450 unique signs that scholars have catalogued. Some of these are clearly pictographic. You can make out a fish, a person carrying something, a jar, various birds, and plants. Others are more abstract, geometric shapes, lines, dots, ovals. It feels like a visual language, where some elements are direct representations and others have evolved into more symbolic forms. One mainstream historical fact is this very number of signs, which strongly suggests a mixed logosyllabic system, where signs could represent whole words or concepts, and others could represent syllables. This is a common stage in the evolution of writing systems. The signs are often beautifully executed, especially on the steatite seals, displaying a remarkable consistency in their form across the vast geographical expanse of the Indus civilization and over the centuries of its existence. This standardization is a hallmark of a mature script. Imagine the scribes, or perhaps skilled artisans, carefully incising these tiny characters, each one having a specific meaning or sound. You might also notice that some signs appear to be combinations of other simpler signs, creating compound characters. This is another layer of complexity, suggesting a sophisticated system for generating new symbols or nuances of meaning. It's not quite like adding an emoji to your text message to change the tone, but it's in that ballpark of linguistic cleverness. One of the most fundamental questions when you encounter a new script is, which way do you read it? Left to right like English? Right to left like Arabic or Hebrew? Or perhaps even top to bottom? For the Indus script, the general consensus among scholars is that it was written from right to left. How did they figure this out? Well, there are a few telltale signs. On many seals, if you look at a line of script, the signs on the far left sometimes appear a bit squashed or are shifted slightly upwards or downwards, as if the scribe was running out of room. It's like when you're handwriting a note and you misjudge the space, having to cram the last few letters in. That's classic evidence for right to left writing. Further evidence comes from the occasional instances where strokes of adjacent signs overlap. The sequence of these overlaps can sometimes indicate which sign was made first. There are also some rare examples of longer inscriptions that appear on multiple lines. Historians still argue whether the script was consistently right to left or if it sometimes employed a system called bustlepheidon. Bustlepheidon literally means, as the ox plows, where the direction of writing alternates with each line, so, one line right to left, the next left to right, and so on. While there are a few artifacts that have led some to propose bustlepheidon, the evidence isn't conclusive for it being a common practice, and most inscriptions are so short, just one line, that it's hard to tell. For now, if you're trying to make sense of an Indus inscription, your best bet is to start reading from the right. Getting the direction wrong would be like trying to watch a movie by starting at the end credits. You might see some familiar names, but the plot will be utterly baffling. The materials chosen for these inscriptions also give us clues. Steatite, as we noted, was perfect for seals, easy to carve, durable when fired, ideal for making multiple impressions. The clay that these seals were pressed into would have been readily available. This suggests a system geared towards repeated administrative or economic functions. The terracotta and faience tablets, being less durable or perhaps easier to mass-produce in certain forms, might have been used for different purposes, maybe short-term records, tokens, or even educational exercises. Imagine little Harappan children learning their signs on clay tablets, a bit like ancient etch-a-sketches. The rare copper tablets, being more valuable and permanent, could have held information considered more important or needing longer preservation. But here's a crucial point: the materials we have are the ones that survived millennia buried underground. It's almost certain that the Indus people also wrote on perishable materials like palm leaves, cloth, or wood, just as many other ancient civilizations did. If they wrote longer texts, stories, histories, detailed records, religious treatises, these would almost certainly have been on such materials. And these, tragically, would have decayed long ago in the Indus Valley's climate, leaving us with only these tantalizingly short, often formulaic inscriptions on durable materials. It's like trying to understand modern literature by only having access to credit card receipts and Twitter posts. You get a sense of some activity, but the grand narratives are missing. So, as these first glyphs emerged from the earth, they presented a complex picture, a beautifully crafted, standardized script, used across a vast area, primarily on small, durable objects designed for sealing or brief notations. The direction of writing seemed mostly right to left. The symbols themselves hinted at a pictographic origin but had evolved into a more complex system. And the overwhelming majority of texts were frustratingly short. This was the raw material the first would-be decipherers had to work with, a collection of silent symbols that whispered of a highly organized society, but refused to speak clearly about its thoughts, its language, or its deepest secrets. The stage was set for a century of intense scrutiny, brilliant theories, and, as we'll see, quite a few dead ends. So, there you are, an imaginary archaeologist or perhaps an eager linguist in the early 1920s and 30s. The dust is still settling from the major excavations at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. And these curious little inscribed seals and tablets are piling up. You've got the raw material we talked about, hundreds, then thousands, of these elegant, tiny symbols. The academic world is buzzing. A whole new civilization, a whole new script. The thrill is palpable. You can almost hear the collective gasp of scholars across the globe as they lean in, magnifying glasses at the ready. After all, the 19th and early 20th centuries had seen some spectacular decipherment successes. Jean-François Champollion had cracked Egyptian hieroglyphs using the Rosetta Stone, and the cuneiform scripts of Mesopotamia were yielding their secrets. Surely, this new Indus script, with its charming little pictures, would soon join the ranks of understood ancient writing. Or so they hoped. The biggest, most glaring problem, the elephant in the room, or perhaps the zebu in the scriptorium, was the complete absence of a bilingual key. There was no Indus Valley Rosetta Stone. No convenient inscription that laid out the same text in the unknown Indus script and also in a known language, like Sumerian or Akkadian. That single missing piece meant that the relatively quick, verifiable breakthroughs seen with Egyptian hieroglyphs were simply not on the cards. It was like being given a locked diary without any hint of where the key might be hidden. This lack of a bilingual text forced the early would-be decipherers down paths that were, shall we say, often more creative than conclusive. You couldn't just match words, you had to guess, infer, and sometimes leap to conclusions with the athletic grace of a mountain goat, but perhaps less certain footing. Despite this monumental hurdle, the allure of the unknown was too strong, and scholars eagerly stepped up to the challenge. It was the dawn of the codebreakers, armed with pencils, paper, and boundless enthusiasm. One of the earliest and, well, most colorful figures to wade into these murky waters was Lieutenant Colonel L.A. Waddell. Now, Waddell was a British explorer and a man of many, many theories. In the 1920s, he boldly proclaimed that he had deciphered the Indus script. His method? He declared that the Indus people were, in fact, Sumerians, and that their script was an early form of Sumerian pictographs. He then proceeded to read the names of famous Sumerian kings and figures into the Indus inscriptions. For example, he identified one Harappan figure as the Sumerian king Sargon of Akkad. His decipherments were based on rather superficial resemblances between selected Indus signs and some Sumerian signs, often ignoring the vast differences and the chronological gymnastics required. It's like seeing a blurry photo of a stranger and confidently declaring it's your long-lost Uncle Fred from Australia, based purely on a vaguely similar hat. This approach, connecting Indus script to Sumerian with such imaginative leaps, is our quirky or fringe tidbit for this section. Waddell's work, while demonstrating immense, if misplaced, confidence, is now entirely discredited by mainstream scholarship, but it serves as a vivid example of the Wild West atmosphere of early Indus script research. Other, more cautious scholars also dipped their toes in. The renowned Egyptologist Sir Flinders Petrie, who had a knack for spotting patterns, briefly examined the script. He suggested it was primarily a pictographic system, perhaps related to very early forms of Brahmi script, which, as we noted with Cunningham, was a recurring early thought. However, he didn't pursue it in depth. Then there was Piero Merighi, an Italian scholar who had experience with other undeciphered scripts like Hittite hieroglyphs. He took a more systematic approach, attempting to classify the Indus signs based on their appearance and presumed pictographic meaning. He viewed it as a picture-writing system, and while he didn't claim a full decipherment, his careful cataloging was a step towards more structured analysis. One of the most significant and sustained early efforts came from a Spanish Jesuit priest working in India, Father Henry Eras. Starting in the 1930s, Eras dedicated years to studying the script and developed a comprehensive theory that it represented an early form of Dravidian, the language family that includes Tamil, Telugu, and Kannada, spoken today mainly in southern India. This is a mainstream historical fact. Father Eras's Proto-Dravidian hypothesis was one of the first major, systematically argued linguistic connections proposed for the Indus script. He meticulously analyzed the signs, attempting to assign them phonetic values based on the acrophonic principle. This means he'd identify a sign's pictographic meaning, e.g., a fish, and then assign it a phonetic value based on the presumed Proto-Dravidian word for that object, e.g. If fish was mean in Proto-Dravidian, the fish sign might represent the sound mean or just m. Eras translated many inscriptions, identifying names of chieftains, deities, and descriptions of religious ceremonies. His work was incredibly detailed and influential, and his general hypothesis that the underlying language could be Dravidian remains one of the leading theories even today, supported by many other scholars, as we'll explore later. However, his specific phonetic assignments and translations, like those of his contemporaries, could not be independently verified. Without that bilingual key, it was hard to know if his readings were accurate or just internally consistent guesses. It's like building a magnificent house of cards, impressive, intricate. But one wrong assumption and the whole thing can come tumbling down. These early attempts, passionate and pioneering as they were fraught with methodological pitfalls. One major issue was the inherent subjectivity in identifying the pictograms. What one scholar saw as a man carrying a water skin on a yoke, another might interpret as a deity with an arched headdress, and a third might just shrug and label it complex geometric shape. Your interpretation of the picture would then dictate your guess at its meaning or associated sound, leading to vastly different results. It's a bit like cloud gazing, everyone sees something different in the same fluffy cumulus. Then there was the look-alike fallacy. This is a classic trap in decipherment. You see an Indus sign that looks a bit like a sign from, say, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, or Proto-Elamite script from nearby Iran, or even the Rapa Nui script from distant Easter Island. Yes, people really did make these comparisons. The temptation is to assume that because they look similar, they must have similar meanings or phonetic values. But scripts can develop similar-looking signs independently, or signs can be borrowed and have their meanings completely changed. Assuming a direct link based on superficial resemblance is like assuming two people who wear similar glasses must also share the same political opinions or taste in music. It's often a recipe for error. The early researchers were casting their nets wide, looking for parallels in linear A and B from Crete, Hittite hieroglyphs, even early Chinese characters. It was a global search for clues, but sometimes it felt like trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle using pieces from 10 different boxes. Furthermore, the nature of the inscriptions themselves, those short, often repetitive strings of symbols, made it incredibly difficult to test hypotheses rigorously. In a long text, you can look for grammatical patterns, repeated phrases in different contexts, and statistical frequencies that might give you leverage. But with an average of just 5 signs per inscription, the data set for each text was tiny. It was like trying to understand the plot of War and Peace by reading only random 5-word snippets. You might get a few character names, maybe a verb or two, but the grand narrative would remain elusive. From the very beginning, the question of what language, or languages, the script encoded was a hot topic. As we've seen, Dravidian was an early and persistent candidate, championed by Eros. Others proposed an Indo-Aryan language, an early form of Sanskrit or a related tongue, suggesting connections to the Vedic culture that would later become prominent in India. Some even suggested links to Munda languages, spoken by tribal groups in eastern India, or, given the lack of clear connections, that the Indus language might be an isolate, unrelated to any known language family. Historians still argue whether any of these early attempts, based on one linguistic hypothesis or another, managed to grasp even a few correct phonetic values or sign meanings. Without external validation, it's incredibly hard to sift the inspired guesses from the wishful thinking. Imagine the atmosphere in those early days. The initial rush of excitement. The dream of unveiling the secrets of this ancient civilization. Scholars hunched over their desks, surrounded by hand-drawn copies of seals, photographs, and notes. The faint smell of old paper and ink, the quiet scratching of pen nibs. There was a palpable sense of being on the verge of a great discovery. But as the years turned into decades, and the script stubbornly refused to yield its secrets easily, that initial optimism likely became tinged with a deep sense of frustration. The code was proving far tougher to crack than anyone had anticipated. It was a silent challenge issued from across 5 millennia, and the first generation of codebreakers, for all their brilliance and dedication, found themselves grappling with an enigma that seemed to grow more complex with each new theory. Their work laid the foundation, highlighting the difficulties and mapping out some of the possible paths, but the summit of decipherment remained far out of reach. So, the early codebreakers, with their magnifying glasses and grand theories, had valiantly charged at the silent walls of the Indus script, only to find them far more formidable than anticipated. The lack of a bilingual key, the short inscriptions, the look-alike traps, it was a linguistic assault course. But if the direct frontal attack on the script's meaning was proving so difficult, perhaps a more subtle approach was needed. What if, instead of just staring at the symbols themselves, we paid closer attention to the objects these symbols were written on? What was the canvas for this mysterious art? You see, the medium can often tell you a lot about the message, or at least its intended purpose. Let's return to those iconic Indus seals, the most common bearers of the script. As you hold one in your mind's eye, that small, square piece of fired steatite, about an inch across, with its beautifully carved animal and those enigmatic signs above it, and the little perforated boss on the back, you're holding the key to understanding at least one major function of this writing system. These weren't just pretty pocket charms. The intaglio carving, designed to create a raised impression, and the discovery of numerous clay tags, or sealings, bearing these impressions, make their primary purpose clear. This is a mainstream historical fact. These seals were used to stamp clay that was affixed to goods or rooms, essentially acting as locks or labels. Archaeologists have found many of these clay sealings with the reverse side showing impressions of reeds, matting, cloth, or wooden boxes, indicating they were pressed onto bales of goods, jar lids, or perhaps even the ropes securing doors. Imagine you're an Indus merchant preparing a consignment of fine cotton cloth, or perhaps a shipment of carnelian beads. destined for a city downriver or even overseas to distant Mesopotamia. You'd bundle your goods, wrap them, and then take a lump of soft clay, press it over the knot or fastening, and then firmly push your personal seal into it. The clay would harden, bearing the imprint of your unique animal motif and your name or title in the script. It was a mark of ownership, a guarantee of authenticity, perhaps a quality control stamp, or a way to ensure the goods hadn't been tampered with. It was the Bronze Age equivalent of those tamper-proof seals on modern packaging. Or perhaps a very sophisticated, inspected by number 7, sticker, only with more artistic flair and a creature that might be a unicorn. The sheer number of unique seals found, thousands of them, suggests that many individuals, or perhaps families or trading houses, possessed their own. This implies a bustling economy with a need for accountability and identification on a grand scale. The iconography on these seals, usually a prominent animal like the unicorn, bull, elephant, rhinoceros, or tiger, positioned below the line of script, adds another layer of intrigue. Was the animal a totem of the owner's clan? A representation of a deity they worshipped? Or did it signify their profession or the origin of their goods? And how did it relate to the script above it? Did the text name the animal? Or was the animal a visual identifier for an individual or group whose name was written in the script? It's like having a company logo and the company name, they work together, but how exactly? Now, let's move beyond the seals to other, perhaps even more puzzling, canvases. You'd find tiny tablets, meticulously crafted from terracotta, steatite, or faience. These aren't for making impressions. The script on them is meant to be read directly. They come in a delightful variety of shapes, squares, rectangles, even circles, and triangles. Some are miniature, barely larger than your thumbnail. What were these for? Some tablets have the same inscription repeated on many examples, as if they were mass-produced. Were they tokens, perhaps granting access to a certain granary or temple precinct? Or maybe they were amulets or talismans, the script itself imbued with protective or auspicious power. You can imagine someone clutching a tiny faience tablet with a few carefully inscribed signs, hoping for a good harvest or a safe journey. It's not too far-fetched. Writing has often been associated with magical or sacred power in many cultures. Perhaps some were the Bronze Age equivalent of a get-out-of-jail-free card, though hopefully not needed too often. Some of these small tablets, particularly the molded terracotta ones, often feature script on one side and a numeral-like symbol or a simple icon on others. This has led to speculation that they might be related to accounting or rationing. Imagine them as chits or vouchers for specific quantities of goods. The debate continues: were these primarily for economic administration, or did they serve a ritualistic function? Maybe both? Historians still argue whether these miniaturized texts were for mundane record-keeping, like receipts for a single goat, or for invoking blessings during specific ceremonies. The context in which they are found sometimes offers clues, but often, they're just part of the general fill of an ancient city, their original purpose lost to time. Then you have the script appearing on pottery. These are usually much cruder than the elegant carvings on seals. Often, it's just a few signs scratched into the wet clay before firing. Or sometimes after. These pottery marks are found across the Indus Civilization. Were they simple ownership marks, like scrawling your initials on your coffee mug to stop your roommate from using it? Or were they potter's marks, identifying the workshop that produced the vessel? Some might have indicated the contents or the capacity of the pot, though the inscriptions are generally too short for detailed descriptions. It's a bit like trying to decipher a single, cryptic emoji on the bottom of a bowl. It clearly meant something to someone. But what? Frustratingly brief, these pottery inscriptions nevertheless show the script wasn't just confined to elite administrative tools like seals, it had a presence in more everyday contexts. Even if we can't quite read the ancient equivalent of "handle with care" or "best chai served here" beyond these more common items, The Indus script occasionally graced even rarer and more intriguing canvases. At Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists have found a number of thin, flat copper tablets. These are quite different from the clay or steatite tablets. They are more durable, the script incised into the metal. Often, these copper tablets feature an animal on one side, curiously. Often animals not commonly seen on seals, like hares or ibexes, and script on the other, or script on both sides. The use of metal suggests these inscriptions were meant to last. Perhaps carrying more permanent information. Were they legal documents, land records, royal edicts, if there were royals, or perhaps special amulets with potent inscriptions? The effort involved in creating them certainly implies a higher value placed on their content. And then you have even more unusual items. Ivory or bone rods and sticks, carefully smoothed and inscribed with lines of script, have been unearthed. What on earth were these for? Their elongated shape is suggestive. Were they divining rods? The script guiding some form of prophecy? Were they measuring tools, with the script labeling units or owners? Or perhaps they were intricate game pieces. The script denoting their function or value in some long-forgotten Indus board game. You can picture someone rolling these rods. The firelight glinting off the polished bone and the mysterious symbols. Trying to read their fortune or perhaps just their next move in a game that might have been the ancient predecessor to Ludo, though probably with higher stakes. Like who gets the last serving of barley stew. One particularly fascinating, and almost unique, discovery comes from the city of Dhalavira in Gujarat. Here, near a major gateway, lay the remains of what appears to have been a large wooden signboard. The wood itself had long decayed, but the letters, formed from inlaid pieces of white gypsum, had fallen to a chamber floor. This Dhalavira signboard is exceptional because of its size. The individual signs are about 37 centimeters, around 15 inches, high. This is our quirky tidbit for this section. It suggests that the Indus script wasn't always confined to tiny seals and tablets. It could be displayed publicly, writ large for many to see. What did it say? A city name? A temple proclamation? Welcome to Dhalavira, please keep chariots to the left. We'll never know, but it hints at a broader range of literacy and public use of the script than the smaller finds might suggest. Finally, the script even appears on personal ornaments. Faience or terracotta bangles have been found with Indus signs inscribed on them. This brings the script to a very intimate level. Were these the names of the wearers? Auspicious symbols to bring good luck or ward off evil? Or perhaps just decorative patterns that happen to be script signs? Imagine wearing a piece of jewelry that not only looks beautiful but also carries a message, even if only a select few could read it. This incredible variety of canvases, from official-looking seals and copper plates to humble pottery marks and personal bangles, tells us something vital. It suggests that the Indus script, whatever its secrets, was not a rarefied system confined to a tiny elite of scribes. It seems to have been integrated into many aspects of Indus life: administration, trade, industry, personal identity, and possibly ritual. It was adaptable, appearing on durable and perhaps perishable materials, in miniature and occasionally in large public displays. The people who used it were clearly part of a highly organized, complex society that valued some form of written communication or symbolic marking. The script's versatility across these different objects hints at a level of societal sophistication that makes its silence all the more profound, and the desire to finally understand what it says all the more urgent. You've journeyed with us through the dusty plains of the Indus Valley, marveled at its ordered cities, and felt the smooth, cool surface of those enigmatic seals. We've seen the script adorning not just official-looking stamps but also everyday pots and personal bangles, hinting at a system of communication woven into the fabric of Harappan life. We've also sympathized with the early codebreakers, whose dreams of a quick decipherment crashed against the hard reality of short texts and no bilingual key. The script was clearly versatile. adaptable to different canvases, but what about its internal logic? Could we find patterns within the chaos of those 400-odd symbols, even if we couldn't read the words? This is where the story takes a turn towards the more modern, and decidedly less dusty, realm of the digital detective. As the decades passed and the number of known inscriptions grew into the thousands, it became clear that the human brain, remarkable as it is, needed some assistance. Trying to manually track the relationships between hundreds of signs across thousands of texts was like trying to map every single ant in an anthill with just a notepad and pencil. You'd get some idea, sure, but the sheer scale and complexity would overwhelm you. So, enter the computer, or, at least, the systematic, data-driven mindset that computers would eventually supercharge. The first crucial step was to create a reliable, standardized database of all known Indus inscriptions. This was, and continues to be, a monumental task undertaken by dedicated scholars. Imagine them, poring over photographs and actual artifacts, meticulously recording each sign, its position, the object it was found on, and its archaeological context. Figures like Iravatham Mahadevan in India and Asko Parpala in Finland, along with their teams, spent years compiling comprehensive sign lists and corpora of texts. These databases, now often digitized, form the bedrock of modern computational analysis. Without this painstaking foundational work, no amount of fancy algorithms could get you very far. It's the essential, often unglamorous, spadework of linguistic archaeology. With these digital corpora in hand, researchers could finally unleash the power of statistics. What can numbers tell you about a silent script? Quite a lot, as it turns out. One of the first things you can do is a sign frequency analysis. Which signs appear most often? Which are incredibly rare? In English, for example, E is the star of the show, while Z and Q are more like cameo appearances. Similarly, in the Indus script, some signs, like the famous jar sign or certain fish variants, are quite common, while others appear only a handful of times. This doesn't tell you what they mean, but it does suggest that the common signs might represent frequent sounds, common grammatical particles, or perhaps core concepts in the Indus lexicon. If the fish sign pops up everywhere, it doesn't automatically mean they were obsessed with seafood restaurants. It could be a common phonetic component or a frequently used word. You know, it's like how the thumbs up emoji is everywhere now, doesn't mean we're all hitchhiking. Even more revealing is positional analysis. This is where you examine where in an inscription a sign typically appears, at the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or, most interestingly, at the very end. And here, computational studies have yielded a mainstream historical fact: certain Indus signs show a strong preference for appearing at the end of sign sequences. This is a huge clue. In many languages, grammatical information, like plural markers, case endings, showing if a noun is a subject, object, etc., or tense markers on verbs, often comes in the form of suffixes. Little bits added to the end of a word. The fact that some Indus signs behave like this strongly suggests they might be grammatical markers. Imagine if you always saw a little squiggle at the end of words that meant many. You wouldn't know what the word itself meant, but you'd know it was plural. That's the kind of insight positional analysis offers. Researchers also look at sign pairings and triplets. Which signs like to hang out together? Are there common duos or trios that appear much more often than chance would dictate? This can help identify common syllables, compound words, or fixed grammatical phrases. It's like noticing that Q is almost always followed by U in English, or that ing often clusters together at the end of verbs. These recurring partnerships are building blocks of language. More sophisticated techniques, like entropy analysis, have also been applied. Entropy, in this context, is a measure of the randomness or predictability of the script. Linguistic systems tend to have a certain degree of order. They're not completely random, but they're also not rigidly fixed. You can't just string any letters together to make a word in English. There are rules. By measuring the entropy of the Indus script and comparing it to known linguistic scripts, like Sumerian or Egyptian, on one hand, and non-linguistic symbol systems, like heraldic emblems or astronomical symbols, on the other, researchers try to gauge where Indus fits. Most such studies suggest its statistical properties are more aligned with linguistic scripts. However, historians still argue whether these statistical patterns, compelling as they are, offer definitive proof that the script encodes language, or if some highly complex non-linguistic systems, perhaps representing intricate social hierarchies or detailed ritual sequences, could, in theory, produce similar statistical footprints. The debate is subtle and ongoing, often hinging on the precise mathematical models used and the interpretation of their results. It's a bit like a doctor looking at a fuzzy X-ray. Different specialists might see slightly different things. Even without a full decipherment, this kind of structural analysis, powered by computers, has painted a clearer picture of how the script likely functioned. The right-to-left direction of writing, initially suggested by things like cramped signs on the left, is further supported by statistical analysis of sign order and how sequences begin and end. The general absence of obvious word dividers is a pain. But statistical clustering algorithms can sometimes suggest probable word boundaries, highlighting groups of signs that seem to stick together as a unit. The strong evidence for signs acting as suffixes, and possibly some as prefixes, points towards a language that used affixes to modify word meanings, a common feature of many languages, including Dravidian and Indo-European families. And the overall number of signs, around 400 to 450 distinct ones, and their frequency distribution patterns continue to support the idea that it's a logosyllabic script. A mix of signs for whole words and signs for syllables. This means you're not just dealing with a simple alphabet or a vast catalog of thousands of word signs, it's a more nuanced, intermediate system. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some computational studies have revealed an almost surprisingly rigid order for certain sign combinations. Particular signs almost always follow certain other signs, and almost never appear after others. This has led some researchers to joke that it's as if the Indus scribes had a very strict, built-in spellchecker or grammar Nazi looking over their shoulder. If you tried to write a sign out of its accepted sequence, maybe a little red squiggle would appear on your clay tablet. This high degree of ordering further suggests a structured, rule-governed system, very much like language. Of course, computational analysis isn't a magic wand. The old adage, garbage in, garbage out, applies. The results are only as good as the accuracy and completeness of the sign lists and the corpus of texts fed into the computer. And while these methods are fantastic for revealing structure, patterns, and probabilities, they can't tell you the meaning of the signs directly. They can tell you that a certain sign acts like a suffix, but not what that suffix means. They can tell you that two signs often appear together, but not what word or concept that pair represents. It's like understanding the grammar of a sentence perfectly but not knowing the definition of any of the words. You know how it's said, but not what is being said. Furthermore, statistical analysis alone usually can't identify the underlying language family. It can test if the script's observed structure is compatible with the grammatical structure of a proposed language, like Dravidian or Indo-Aryan, but it can't definitively prove the connection. That still requires finding concrete linguistic links, like plausible phonetic values for signs that then form recognizable words in that language. So, these digital detectives, with their algorithms and databases, have brought us closer to understanding the mechanics of the Indus script. They've provided powerful, objective tools to sift through vast amounts of data and uncover subtle patterns that would have been invisible to earlier generations of scholars. But the process isn't fully automated. The human element, the linguistic expertise, the archaeological intuition, the ability to form hypotheses and interpret the computer's output within a broader historical context, remains absolutely crucial. The computers are incredibly powerful assistants, crunching the numbers at lightning speed, but they're not yet ready to whisper the lost language of the Indus into our ears. That part of the journey, bridging structure to meaning, still requires a spark of human insight, and perhaps, a little bit of luck. Alright, so our digital detectives have crunched the numbers, analyzed the patterns, and given us a much clearer picture of the Indus script structure. We know it's likely written right to left, has signs that behave like suffixes, and probably uses a mix of word signs and syllable signs. That's great progress. But it's like knowing all the rules of grammar for an alien language without understanding a single word of its vocabulary. The big question still looms. What actual human language do these intricate symbols represent? Of all the candidates proposed over the decades, one has consistently drawn the most attention and scholarly support. The idea that the Indus script encodes an early form of a Dravidian language. So, what exactly are Dravidian languages? You might be familiar with some of them. They form a large family of over 80 languages spoken by more than 200 million people, primarily in southern and central India, but also in parts of Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Think of major languages like Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Malayalam. These are all part of the Dravidian family, boasting rich literary traditions stretching back centuries, in some cases millennia. And crucially, these languages are structurally very different from the Indo-Aryan languages like Hindi, Bengali, and Sanskrit, which form another major language group in the subcontinent. The idea that the Indus script might be Dravidian isn't new. As we touched upon, Father Henry Eros was championing this theory way back in the 1930s. But it gained significant momentum in the latter half of the 20th century, thanks to the rigorous work of scholars like the Finnish Indologist Asko Parpala, the Indian epigraphist Aravathan Mahadevan, and the Soviet linguist Yuri Norizov, who famously also played a key role in cracking the Mayan script. The man clearly had a knack for ancient puzzles. These researchers, and many others, have built a compelling, though not universally accepted, case. What are the main arguments for this southern echo in the Indus Valley? Well, one line of evidence comes from linguistic history itself. It's a mainstream historical fact that early Indo-Aryan texts, particularly the Rig Veda, composed roughly between 1500 and 1000 BCE. So after the peak of the Indus civilization, contain a number of loanwords and linguistic features that appear to be borrowed from Dravidian languages. This suggests that as Indo-Aryan speakers migrated into or became prominent in the subcontinent, they encountered populations speaking Dravidian languages, and some mixing occurred. The presence of these Dravidian elements in the north, where the Indus civilization once flourished, hints that Dravidian languages might have been spoken much more widely across that region in earlier times. Then there's the curious case of the Brahui people. Brahui is a Dravidian language spoken today by a relatively small population in Balochistan, a region of Pakistan that lies to the west of the core Indus Valley. This is geographically isolated from the main Dravidian-speaking areas of South India. The existence of this Dravidian linguistic island so close to the Indus heartland is often cited as a potential remnant, a linguistic fossil, if you will, of a time when Dravidian languages had a much larger footprint in northwestern South Asia. Of course, it's not quite that simple. Some scholars argue that the Brahui speakers might have migrated to Balochistan much later, perhaps from central India, but their presence there remains a tantalizing piece of the puzzle. Perhaps the most persuasive arguments, however, come from attempts to match the structural features of the Indus script, as revealed by computational analysis, with the grammatical features of Dravidian languages, and then to propose specific readings of the signs. Dravidian languages are known for being agglutinative, meaning they love to stick multiple suffixes onto a root word to denote grammatical functions like case, number, or tense. Remember how statistical analysis suggested that certain Indus signs behave like suffixes? This fits rather nicely with Dravidian grammar. It's like finding a very specific type of tool mark on an ancient carving, and then discovering a known toolkit from that era that contains exactly that type of chisel. The real excitement, though, comes with proposed phonetic decipherments based on Dravidian vocabulary. Many of these attempts use the acrophonic principle, which we touched on with Father Eros. The idea is that the phonetic value of a pictographic sign is derived from the first sound, or syllable, of the word for the object it depicts in the proposed language. The superstar example of this approach, and one of the most elegant and widely discussed proposed decipherments, involves the ubiquitous fish sign. Imagine you're an Indus scribe. You draw a picture of a fish. In many Dravidian languages, the word for fish is mean, or something very similar. Now, here's the clever bit. The word mean in Dravidian also happens to mean star or planet. This is a homophone, like sun and sun in English. Could the Indus people have used the easily drawn fish symbol to represent not just fish, but also, punningly, stars or celestial bodies? Ascoparpala and others have championed this idea. They point out that fish signs often appear with short strokes or marks next to them, which could be numeral signs or other modifiers. For example, a sequence of 6 plus fish, represented by 6 short strokes next to a fish sign, could be read as Arumin, which in Dravidian means 6-star, a common ancient term for the Pleiades star cluster. Similarly, 7-star, Elumin, would be Ursa Major, the Great Bear. These constellations were hugely important in ancient astronomies and calendars. This fish equals star equation is incredibly appealing because it links a clear pictogram to a known linguistic pun that then unlocks potential meanings related to gods, astronomy, and timekeeping, all things you might expect an ancient civilization to be writing about. If this is true, it's like the Indus people were ancient masters of the visual pun, using their script in a way that was both practical and poetically clever. Hey Uruk, nice ziggurat, but can your script do this? Other proposed Dravidian readings follow similar logic. For instance, Iravatham Mahadevan focused on signs that often appear at the end of inscriptions, suggesting they might be titles or patronymics, father's name markers. He interpreted a common jar sign, which he saw as a measuring vessel, as a with makron, meaning male or servant in Dravidian, often used in titles. Another sign, looking like a person with upraised arms or carrying a yoke, has been interpreted as al, person, ruler, or related to tal, head. By combining these, short sequences could be read as servant of deity X, or name, son of name. However, the Dravidian hypothesis is not without its critics and challenges. The biggest hurdle remains the lack of definitive proof in the form of a long bilingual text. Without a Harappan Rosetta Stone, all these clever readings, however plausible, remain unconfirmed hypotheses. You can build a very consistent internal system, but it's hard to be absolutely sure it's the right system. It's like solving a Sudoku puzzle. Your solution might follow all the rules, but if you made one wrong assumption early on, the whole grid could be perfectly logical but ultimately incorrect. Another challenge is the inherent subjectivity in identifying the pictographic meaning of many signs. While a fish is pretty clearly a fish, what about more abstract symbols? Is that bent line a roof or a bow? Is that circle a sun or a pot? Your initial pictographic guess heavily influences the Dravidian word you search for, and thus the phonetic value you assign. Furthermore, Dravidian languages themselves have evolved over the past 4,000 to 5,000 years. Reconstructing Proto-Dravidian, the ancestral language from which modern Dravidian languages descended, is a complex task in itself, and there isn't universal agreement on all its forms. Which specific stage or dialect of Proto-Dravidian would the Indus people have spoken? This adds another layer of uncertainty. Trying to match a script from 2500 BCE with a reconstructed language is like trying to tune a radio to a station that stopped broadcasting centuries ago. Using an antenna you've built from historical descriptions of antennas. Then there's the Brahwi question. while its presence in Balochistan is suggestive. Historians still argue whether the Brahui are truly an ancient remnant population that has been there since Indus times, or if they migrated to the area much later, perhaps in the medieval period. If the latter is true, their presence doesn't necessarily bolster the case for Dravidian in the Indus Valley itself. Despite these challenges, the Dravidian hypothesis remains the most widely supported linguistic explanation for the Indus script. Many scholars find the cumulative evidence, the linguistic substratum in Indo-Aryan, the structural compatibility, the elegance of proposed readings like mean, for fish/star, and the potential links with later South Indian cultural traditions, to be highly persuasive. It provides a coherent, if not yet fully proven, framework for understanding what those silent symbols might be trying to tell us. For a quirky tidbit on this, consider the story of Yuri Norizov. Working in Soviet Russia, often with limited and delayed access to Western archaeological publications, he independently analyzed the Indus script, alongside his groundbreaking work on Mayan. Using methods that focused on the script's internal structure and statistical patterns, he also concluded that it was likely logosyllabic and that the underlying language was probably Dravidian. Remarkably aligning with some of the work being done by Parpala and Mahadevan around the same time, even if their specific readings sometimes differed. It's a testament to how different minds, working with the same complex data, can sometimes converge on similar conclusions. So, the echoes from the south, the whispers of an ancient Dravidian tongue, continue to resonate strongly in the halls of Indus script research. It's not a closed case by any means. The jury is still out, and the debate is lively. But for many, it feels like the most promising path towards finally breaking the silence of this fascinating, frustratingly enigmatic script. The quest to confirm or refute it drives much of the ongoing research, pushing scholars to refine their methods, re-examine the evidence, and listen ever more closely for those faint linguistic signals from 5 millennia ago. So, you've heard the compelling echoes from the south, the persuasive arguments suggesting that the Indus script might be whispering in an ancient Dravidian tongue. The fish equals star idea is pretty neat, right? It feels like it could be right. But in the world of unsolved ancient mysteries, one leading theory rarely goes unchallenged. The quest to understand the Indus script isn't a one-horse race, or perhaps, given the context we're about to dive into, not a one-zebu race either. There are other contenders. Other linguistic families vying for the title of the true voice of Harappa. And one of the most persistent, and certainly most debated, alternatives points us not south, but towards the northern currents of language, the Indo-Aryan hypothesis. First off, what are Indo-Aryan languages? This is a major branch of the vast Indo-European language family, a family that includes English, Spanish, Russian, Greek, and many others. Indo-Aryan languages themselves are spoken by hundreds of millions of people today, primarily across northern and central India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. Think of Sanskrit, the classical sacred language of Hinduism, with its ancient Vedic form being among the earliest attested Indo-European languages. Modern giants like Hindi, Bengali, Punjabi, Marathi, and Gujarati all belong to this group. So, the Indo-Aryan hypothesis suggests that the Harappans, the people of the Indus Valley Civilization, spoke an early form of one of these languages, or a closely related Indo-Iranian tongue. Now, this idea immediately wades into some deep and occasionally turbulent historical waters. The origins of Indo-Aryan speakers in the Indian subcontinent, and their relationship with the Indus Valley Civilization, are subjects of intense scholarly and sometimes political debate. You've got the traditional Aryan migration theory, or its more contentious older cousin, the Aryan invasion theory, which is largely discredited in its invasive form, suggesting that speakers of Indo-Aryan languages entered the subcontinent from Central Asia sometime in the 2nd millennium BCE. Then you have indigenous Aryan theories, or the out of India model, which propose that Indo-Aryan languages originated within India and perhaps even spread outwards from there. with the Indus civilization being an early Indo-Aryan or even Vedic culture. This latter view often sees the Indus script as a direct ancestor or early form of Brahmi, the script from which most later Indian scripts derive. It's a complex discussion, and the script is often pulled into it like a key piece of evidence. Who are the proponents of reading the Indus script as Indo-Aryan? While this view has fewer mainstream academic champions today compared to the Dravidian hypothesis, it has had notable supporters. The late Indian archaeologist S.R. Rao was perhaps the most prominent and vocal proponent of an Indo-Aryan decipherment, though his specific readings are now largely rejected by the wider scholarly community. More nuanced arguments often come from scholars who emphasize strong cultural continuities between the Indus civilization and later Vedic culture, suggesting that such deep cultural links might imply linguistic continuity as well. One of the main pillars for the Indo-Aryan argument rests on these perceived cultural continuities. It's a mainstream historical fact that certain symbols and motifs found on Indus seals and artifacts have striking parallels in later Vedic and Hindu traditions. For instance, the swastika symbol, so prevalent in Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, appears frequently on Indus seals. The peepal tree, sacred fig, is often depicted in Indus art and holds immense religious significance in later Indian religions. The so-called Pashupati seal, showing a seated, horned figure surrounded by animals, is often compared to later depictions of the Hindu god Shiva in his aspect as Pashupati, lord of animals. Proponents argue that these powerful shared symbols suggest a direct, unbroken cultural lineage, and therefore, potentially a linguistic one. If the Harappans were already honoring these typically Aryan or Vedic symbols, wouldn't they also be speaking an Aryan language? It's like saying, if they're already drinking tea from a very specific type of teapot, maybe they're also speaking the language that traditionally goes with that teapot. Following this line of reasoning, attempts have been made to assign Indo-Aryan phonetic values to Indus signs. S.R. Rao, for example, argued that the Indus script was not logosyllabic but evolved from a more pictographic system into an alphabetic or semi-alphabetic one by the late Harappan period. He claimed to have identified phonetic values for signs based on their supposed resemblance to later Semitic scripts, which he believed influenced Indus, and then to Brahmi characters. Using these values, he read short Sanskrit phrases and names on the seals, including references to Vedic deities, numbers, and even titles like ruler or protector. He famously published a decipherment that claimed to unlock the script's secrets. However, the Indo-Aryan hypothesis, especially in its more direct Vedic equals Indus forms, faces some pretty significant challenges. One of the biggest is the chronological conundrum. The peak of the Indus civilization is generally dated between roughly 2600 and 1900 BCE. The earliest Indo-Aryan literary work, the Rig Veda, is generally dated by linguists and historians to have been composed somewhat later, perhaps between 1500 and 1000 BCE, with its language reflecting that later period. So, if the Harappans were speaking an Indo-Aryan language, it would have to be a form ancestral to Vedic Sanskrit, a pre-Vedic Indo-Aryan. While that's theoretically possible, directly reading Vedic Sanskrit words into mature Harappan inscriptions, as some attempts have done, is anachronistic. It's like trying to read modern English text using only Chaucerian spellings and vocabulary. Then there's the question of linguistic structure. As we saw, computational analysis suggests the Indus script has features like prominent suffixation, while Indo-Aryan languages do use suffixes and prefixes. Their overall inflectional system is different from the highly agglutinative nature of Dravidian languages. Many linguists argue that the patterns observed in the Indus script are a poorer fit for early Indo-Aryan grammatical structures compared to Dravidian ones. For instance, those strings of signs ending in what look like grammatical markers seem to align more comfortably with Dravidian morphology. Another point of contention revolves around specific cultural markers. The horse, Equus caballus, and the light, spoked wheel chariot are central elements in Vedic Indo-Aryan culture, frequently mentioned in the Rig Veda and associated with warfare and elite status. However, clear evidence for domesticated horses and spoked wheel chariots is notably scarce or absent in the archaeological record of the mature Harappan period. There are some disputed claims of horse remains or depictions, but nothing like the prevalence you'd expect if the culture was fundamentally Vedic. Historians still argue whether the few contested equine remains from Indus sites represent true domesticated horses or related species like onagers, and whether their rarity means they were unknown or simply not culturally significant until later. This horse problem is a significant stumbling block for those who want to equate the Indus civilization directly with Vedic culture. It's a bit like claiming a society was obsessed with space travel but finding no evidence of rockets or astronauts. Most specific Indo-Aryan decipherments, like S.R. Rao's, have unfortunately not stood up to scholarly scrutiny. Critics have pointed to methodological flaws, such as inconsistencies in assigning phonetic values, the arbitrary selection of sign variants to fit preconceived notions, and a tendency to force readings that don't align with the broader linguistic or archaeological context. It's one thing to find a few signs that look like later Brahmi letters, it's quite another to build an entire coherent and verifiable decipherment based on that, especially when the time gap is so large. The debate about cultural continuity versus linguistic continuity is also crucial. Just because certain symbols, like the swastika or the worship of peepal trees, appear in both the Indus civilization and later Vedic culture doesn't automatically mean they spoke the same language. Symbols and religious ideas can be incredibly resilient and adaptable. They can be borrowed, reinterpreted, and incorporated into new cultural and linguistic contexts. Think of how Roman gods were equated with Greek ones, or how religious symbols have crossed cultural boundaries throughout history. The symbols might persist while the language changes entirely. Your great-grandparents and you might both love a particular family heirloom, but you probably don't speak exactly as they did. For a quirky tidbit, consider S.R. Rao's enthusiastic claims. He didn't just read names of Vedic gods, he claimed to have found practical terms, like Kampa, comptroller, numbers, and even references to shipbuilding and maritime trade in the script, all in Sanskrit. He once presented a seal that he argued depicted a horse, which became a focal point of debate due to the general scarcity of horse evidence. While his passion was undeniable, the broader scholarly community found his specific interpretations to be largely based on wishful thinking rather than rigorous methodology. It's a classic case of seeing what you want to see in ambiguous data, a bit like finding shapes in clouds, if you stare long enough. That cloud really can start to look like a Vedic deity riding a chariot, especially if you really want it to. So, while the idea of a direct Indo-Aryan or Vedic identity for the Indus script offers an appealing narrative of deep, indigenous continuity for some, it faces substantial linguistic, chronological, and archaeological hurdles. The theory remains a significant undercurrent in the decipherment debate, often fueled by broader discussions about India's ancient past. But for now, the puzzles of the script structure and the archaeological context seem to make the northern currents a more challenging stream to navigate for those seeking the source of the Indus language. So, we've navigated the strong currents of the Dravidian hypothesis, with its tantalizing fish star puns, and we've waded through the complex and often choppy waters of the Indo-Aryan debate. It might feel like these two are the only ships sailing in the vast ocean of Indus script theories. But the linguistic world is wide, and the ancient past was a tapestry woven with many threads. What if the key to unlocking the Indus script lies not with these frontrunners, but with other, less heralded linguistic families, or perhaps with a language that has no known relatives at all? It's time to explore some of the other tongues that have been proposed, the dark horses in this decipherment race. The very fact that neither the Dravidian nor the Indo-Aryan hypothesis has achieved universal, knockdown drag-out acceptance means the door remains open for alternative explanations. The Indus Valley Civilization, remember, wasn't an isolated island. It was a sprawling network of cities and settlements with trade links reaching far and wide, to Mesopotamia, to the Persian Gulf, to Central Asia. When goods travel, words and ideas often hitch a ride. So, it's not unreasonable to cast our net a bit wider. Let's first look west, towards ancient Iran. Here, contemporary with the Indus civilization, flourished another significant urban culture, the Elamites. Centered in what is now southwestern Iran, Elam had its own sophisticated society and, importantly, its own writing systems. First, there was Proto-Elamite, emerging around 3100 BCE, which is largely undeciphered and pictographic, much like the early stages presumed for Indus. This was followed by Linear Elamite, also undeciphered for a long time though recent breakthroughs are very promising, and later, the Elamites adopted a cuneiform script to write their language. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Indus civilization and Elam were trading partners. Archaeologists have found Indus seals in Elamite sites and Elamite goods in Indus cities. This established contact makes some form of linguistic interaction, or even a shared linguistic ancestry, at least plausible. Some scholars have noted superficial resemblances between certain Proto-Elamite signs and Indus signs. Given that both scripts are roughly contemporary and originated in cultures that were in contact, could they be related? Perhaps they shared a common ancestor script, or one influenced the other. The American archaeologist Walter Fairservice, for instance, while primarily a proponent of a Dravidian solution, did tentatively explore links between some Indus signs and Elamite vocabulary. However, the big challenge here is that Proto-Elamite itself is still mostly a closed book. Trying to decipher one unknown script using another largely unknown script is a bit like trying to open a locked treasure chest with a key from a different locked treasure chest. You might get lucky, but the odds aren't great. Elamite as a language is also fascinating. It's generally considered a language isolate, though some linguists have proposed a connection to Dravidian languages in a wider, Elamo-Dravidian, family. If that were true, an Elamite link could indirectly bolster the Dravidian hypothesis for Indus, but it's all quite speculative. Now, let's turn our gaze eastward within the Indian subcontinent itself, to another ancient language family, the Munda languages. Today, Munda languages like Santali, Mundari, and Ho are spoken by several million people, primarily in tribal communities in eastern and central India. What makes them interesting is that they belong to the larger Austroasiatic language family, which also includes languages like Vietnamese and Khmer in Southeast Asia. Munda languages are considered to be very ancient in India, possibly predating the arrival or widespread prominence of both Dravidian and Indo-Aryan speakers in certain regions. If the Indus people were truly indigenous and represented a very early layer of population in the subcontinent, could their language have been related to Munda? A few scholars have cautiously explored this possibility. They might look for Munda etymologies for ancient place names in the Indus region or for terms related to specific flora, fauna, or cultural practices that might have survived. The primary challenge for the Munda hypothesis is the lack of strong, direct evidence in the script itself that points towards Munda linguistic structures. Munda languages have their own distinct grammatical features, such as complex verb morphology and the use of infixes, grammatical elements inserted inside a word, which are not immediately apparent from the current analyses of Indus script structure. Also, the main concentration of Munda speakers today is quite far from the Indus Valley heartland, though, of course, ancient linguistic geographies could have been very different. It's like finding an old, distinctive style of pottery in one region and wondering if it's connected to a similar style found hundreds of miles away. Possible, but you need more than just a vague resemblance. This brings us to perhaps the most enigmatic possibility of all. What if the Indus language was a language isolate? A language isolate is a language that has no known living or dead relatives. It's the linguistic equivalent of an only child with no traceable family tree. Basque, spoken in the Pyrenees Mountains between Spain and France, is a famous modern example. Ancient Sumerian, the language of southern Mesopotamia, is another. Elamite, as we mentioned, is often treated as one. Could the Indus language be another member of this lonely club? If the Indus language was an isolate, or belonged to a language family that has entirely died out leaving no other trace, it would make the task of decipherment exponentially harder. Without related languages, you have no cognates, related words, to help you guess at meanings or phonetic values. You have no sister languages to provide clues about grammar or syntax. Every single piece of the puzzle would have to be teased out from the internal structure of the script itself and its archaeological context. It's the ultimate cold case. Historians still argue whether the features of the Indus script are truly so unique as to strongly suggest it's an isolate, or if the connections to known language families are just very deeply hidden by time and the script's own peculiarities. The fact that after a century of research, no single proposed linguistic affiliation has convinced everyone, certainly keeps the language X theory on the table. It's a bit like having a suspect in a mystery who has no fingerprints, no DNA record, and no known associates, a true ghost in the linguistic machine. Calling it Language X gives it an air of sci-fi mystery, doesn't it? Tonight on Unsolved Ancient Mysteries, the case of Language X and the terrifyingly ambiguous fish sign. Beyond these more academically discussed possibilities, the fringes of Indus script research sometimes see even more imaginative connections proposed. You might occasionally hear claims linking Indus script to the Rongorongo script of Easter Island, or to Linear A from Minoan Crete, or even further afield. These theories are usually based on very superficial resemblances between a few isolated signs, ignoring the vast geographical distances, chronological gaps, and the lack of any evidence for sustained contact that would allow for such direct script borrowing or genetic relationship. This is where we venture into the territory of our quirky tidbit, the hyperdiffusionist view, where some enthusiasts see connections between almost every ancient civilization, imagining vast networks of influence that most mainstream scholars find unsupported by evidence. It's like seeing a spiral in an Indus seal, a spiral in Celtic art, and a spiral in a galaxy, and declaring they must all be part of one grand cosmic spiral cult. Entertaining, but probably not getting us closer to reading Harappan grocery lists. So why do these other tongues, Elamite, Munda, a hypothetical isolate, or even the more fringe ideas, matter? They matter because they remind us that the ancient world was linguistically incredibly diverse, much more so than today, with many language families and isolates that have long since vanished. They encourage researchers to remain open-minded and to test a wide range of hypotheses. And perhaps most importantly, they underscore the sheer, delightful complexity of the Indus puzzle. The script's silence has allowed it to become a sort of linguistic Rorschach test, where different people, looking at the same enigmatic symbols, see reflections of different linguistic possibilities. While the Dravidian and Indo-Aryan theories currently hold the most scholarly attention, the Indus people themselves are not yet telling us which path is correct, or if, perhaps, the true path is one we've only just begun to glimpse. We've journeyed through the linguistic landscapes of Dravidian, Indo-Aryan, and even peeked at some of the lesser-trodden paths like Elamite and Munda, all in an attempt to find a voice for those silent Indus symbols. But what if we've been asking the wrong question all along? What if those elegant little marks, those charming fish and intricate jars, aren't actually writing a spoken language in the way we usually understand it? This brings us to one of the most fundamental and fiercely debated questions in Indus studies. Are we looking at signs that represent speech? Or is it a sophisticated system of symbols that conveys meaning without being tied to the grammar and syntax of a full-fledged language? Before we dive into the fray, let's quickly clarify what we mean by true writing. Generally, linguists define a full writing system as a set of graphic symbols that can be used to represent most, if not all, of the possible utterances of a spoken language. This means it can capture not just isolated words or concepts, but also grammar, syntax, and the nuances of connected speech. Think of it like this. A red octagonal sign with "stop" written on it uses a linguistic script to convey a command. A picture of a pedestrian on a sign also conveys a clear meaning, pedestrian crossing, but doesn't necessarily use a system that could write a novel or a poem. The latter is a symbolic system. Effective but not full writing. Now, there's a prominent group of scholars, including figures like Michael Witzel, Steve Farmer, and Richard Sproat, who argue that the Indus script falls into this latter category. In 2004, they published a rather provocative paper titled "The Collapse of the Indus Script Thesis. The Myth of a Literate Harappan Civilization," which really stirred the pot. Their central claim is that the Indus symbols, while clearly meaningful and organized, do not represent a true linguistic script. What are their main arguments for this "signs, not speech" position? One of their biggest points is the extreme brevity of the inscriptions. As we've noted, most Indus texts are just 4 or 5 signs long. The longest, generally undisputed, continuous inscription on a single object is about 17 signs. There are a couple of longer ones, like one with 26 signs on 3 sides of a prism tablet, but these are rare exceptions. The famous D'Oliveira signboard is large, yes, but its interpretation as a single continuous linguistic text is also debated by some in this camp. They argue that if this were a literate society using a script to record language, you'd expect to find longer texts, administrative records, myths, letters, historical accounts, something more substantial than these tiny snippets. It's like if all we had of ancient Egyptian writing were just single cartouches with royal names, and no lengthy tomb inscriptions or papyrus texts. Another key argument is the high degree of repetition of certain signs and short sequences of signs, especially on the seals. The same little clusters of symbols appear over and over again. This, they suggest, is more characteristic of formulaic labels, like serial numbers, or fixed titles, or emblems, rather than the flexible, creative combinations you'd expect from a system encoding natural language. They also point to the large number of signs that appear only once. These are called hapax legomena, a fancy term for "said only once." In a functional linguistic script, where signs represent common sounds or grammatical elements, you'd expect most signs to be reused fairly frequently. Having too many unique, rare signs might indicate a system where new symbols could be readily created for specific, limited purposes, rather than a standardized phonetic or syllabic inventory. It's a bit like if every time you wanted to write a new word, you had to invent a brand new letter for it. Not very efficient for language. Furthermore, proponents of the non-linguistic view argue that the Indus system lacks certain features typically found in true writing systems. For example, they question the evidence for a fully developed numbering system beyond simple tallies, though this is contested by other scholars who see clear numerical notations. They also suggest a lack of clear evidence for scribal errors or corrections, which are common byproducts of human linguistic writing. They propose that the Indus symbols are more analogous to non-linguistic symbolic systems found in other cultures, like Mesopotamian deity symbols, Near Eastern heraldic emblems, or even, as they rather cheekily suggested, Boy Scout merit badges. These are all systems that convey meaning, a specific god, a family lineage, an achievement, but they don't encode full sentences or the grammar of a spoken language. So, an Indus seal might display a sequence of symbols representing, say, chief official of the granary, belonging to the unicorn clan, responsible for X district, all conveyed through logograms or ideograms without necessarily reflecting the precise grammatical structure of how that would be spoken. Now, as you can imagine, these arguments have not gone down well with the majority of Indus scholars who maintain that the script is linguistic. This speech camp, including researchers like Asko Parpala, the late Iravatham Mahadevan, Brian Wells, and Nisha Yadav, have strong counterarguments. Their primary response to the brevity issue is the material bias argument. This is a mainstream historical fact, or at least a very widely accepted inference. Most Indus inscriptions survive on durable materials like stone seals, copper tablets, and pottery. If the Harappans wrote longer texts, detailed accounts, literature, religious treatises, they would almost certainly have done so on perishable materials like palm leaves, birch bark, cloth, or wood, just as many other ancient, and later Indian, cultures did. These materials would have long since decayed in the Indus Valley's climate, leaving us with only the short, functional texts on non-perishable items. It's like judging the entirety of 21st century literature solely on the basis of credit card receipts and road signs. You'd get a very skewed picture. They also point out that even in known literate civilizations, early administrative texts can be very short and formulaic. Early Sumerian economic tablets, for instance, often contain just a few signs indicating quantities, commodities, and names. So, brevity in certain contexts doesn't automatically disqualify a script from being linguistic. The strongest counterargument from the speech camp comes from the statistical and structural analyses we discussed earlier. The consistent right-to-left directionality, the evidence of specific signs functioning like suffixes, the non-random sequencing of signs, and measures like entropy that align the Indus script more closely with known linguistic systems than with random or purely symbolic non-linguistic systems. All these features are difficult to explain. And if the script isn't encoding some form of language, why would a non-linguistic system develop such complex, language-like structural properties? The number of distinct signs, around 400 to 450, is also more typical of a logosyllabic script, a mix of word signs and syllable signs, than a purely ideographic system, which might have thousands of signs if each concept has its own unique symbol. Or a simple heraldic system, which might have fewer, more pictorial elements. And what about the Dalavira signboard? Its prominent display in a public gateway strongly suggests it was meant to be read in some fashion, which is more typical of linguistic writing. So, here we have the crux of the debate. Historians, and linguists, and archaeologists, still argue whether the Indus symbols constitute a true script capable of representing the nuances of spoken Harappan language, or if they are a highly sophisticated and structured system of non-linguistic symbols that conveyed meaning in a more limited, perhaps logographic or ideographic, way. For a quirky tidbit on this intense debate, some researchers in the signs, not speech camp have actually tried to demonstrate their point by creating sequences of undeniably non-linguistic symbols, like medieval European heraldic crests or even the abstract Vinca symbols from Neolithic Europe, and then showing that these artificially constructed sequences can exhibit some statistical properties, like certain preferred orderings or repetition rates, that look superficii, similar to those found in the Indus script. It's a clever way to say, see, you can get language-like patterns without actual language. Of course, the speech camp would counter that the degree and complexity of linguistic patterning in the Indus script go far beyond what these simpler, artificial non-linguistic systems can produce. The passion in these academic exchanges can be quite remarkable. You'll find scholarly articles with titles that don't pull any punches, and conference presentations where the Q&A sessions can get more animated than a sports commentary. The implications of this debate are profound. If the Indus symbols are not linguistic, then all the efforts to decipher them by linking them to a specific language family, Dravidian, Indo-Aryan, or anything else, are fundamentally misguided. The research focus should instead shift to understanding the code itself. What did these specific symbols and sequences mean in terms of concepts, affiliations, or administrative functions, without necessarily trying to recover phonetic values or grammar? But if the script is linguistic, then the quest to identify the underlying language and eventually read the texts remains one of the greatest and most exciting challenges in archaeology and historical linguistics. It's a genuine academic cliffhanger. Are those little fish and jars speaking to us in a lost tongue, or are they more like ancient emojis, conveying ideas and affiliations in a clever visual code? The answer is still out there, waiting to be definitively uncovered. So, we've wrestled with the big question: are those Indus symbols actual speech written down, or are they a complex non-linguistic code? Let's assume for a moment, as many scholars do, that it is language. We've then wandered through the linguistic hall of mirrors, peering at Dravidian, Indo-Aryan, and even some more shadowy candidates like Elamite or a complete unknown. But even if we have a favorite linguistic horse in this race, how do we definitively prove it? How do we get from educated guesses about structure and possible language families to actually reading the script with confidence? What we desperately need, the holy grail for any undeciphered script, is a key. And in the world of decipherment, the most famous key of all is the Rosetta Stone. You've all heard of the Rosetta Stone, right? That iconic slab of granodiorite, unearthed in Egypt by Napoleon's soldiers in 1799. It's magic, and the reason it's now a superstar exhibit in the British Museum, much to Egypt's occasional chagrin, is that it bears the same decree inscribed in 3 scripts: Egyptian hieroglyphs, which were then undeciphered, Demotic script, another Egyptian script that was also poorly understood, and crucially, Ancient Greek, a language that scholars could read. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Rosetta Stone, with its parallel Greek text, was the crucial catalyst that allowed Jean-François Champollion in 1822 to finally crack the code of Egyptian hieroglyphs. The known Greek acted as a bridge, a direct translation guide to the unknown Egyptian. Now, imagine the sheer, unadulterated joy that would erupt in archaeological circles if such an artifact, an Indus Valley Rosetta Stone, were to be discovered. Picture a stone stele, a clay tablet, even a humble potsherd, bearing a text in the familiar, enigmatic Indus script, and right alongside it, the same message inscribed in a known contemporary script, perhaps Mesopotamian cuneiform, or even a more deciphered form of Elamite. The problem is, after a century of digging, sifting, and searching, there is an absolute, deafening silence on this front. No such bilingual or trilingual text has ever been found. Not one. This frustrating absence is, without a doubt, the single greatest practical obstacle to a universally accepted decipherment of the Indus script. It's like having a beautifully complex encrypted file but knowing the password was thrown into a volcano. Why are bilingual texts so incredibly vital? Well, they provide direct phonetic clues, especially through proper names. In the Rosetta Stone, names like Ptolemy and Cleopatra were identifiable in the Greek text. By locating the corresponding hieroglyphic sequences, often enclosed in cartouches, those oval rings, Champollion could tentatively assign phonetic values to individual hieroglyphic signs. This was his foot in the door. An Indus bilingual could do the same. If we found a text mentioning, say, a known Sumerian merchant who traded with Harappa, and his name appeared in both cuneiform and Indus script, we could start to piece together the sounds of the Indus signs. Bilinguals also illuminate grammatical structure. By comparing how sentences are formed and how grammatical elements, like plurals, tenses, or case markers, are expressed in the known language versus the unknown script, you can deduce the grammatical rules of the mystery language. It's like having a side-by-side translation that doesn't just give you vocabulary, but also shows you how the sentences are built. And, of course, once you have some phonetic values and a grasp of the grammar, you can start unlocking the meaning of other words in the unknown script, gradually building up a vocabulary. Perhaps most importantly, a bilingual text allows any proposed decipherment to be rigorously tested and independently verified. If someone claims a certain Indus sign means king, you could check if it corresponds to the word for king in the known part of a bilingual text. Without this, decipherment claims remain speculative, however ingenious they might seem. So, if an Indus Rosetta Stone is out there, where might it be hiding? One possibility is within the Indus Valley itself. Perhaps a Harappan city once boasted a monumental inscription, a royal decree. A treaty between cities, or a dedication on a temple, if they had them in the way Mesopotamia did. However, as we've seen, the Harappans generally didn't seem to go in for grand, boastful public inscriptions in the same way other Bronze Age civilizations did. Their script use appears more administrative and personal, at least based on what has survived. Still, you never know. One unexcavated corner of a major city, one unexplored mound, could hold the key. A more tantalizing prospect for many archaeologists lies outside the Indus Valley. In regions with which the Harappans had strong trade contacts, particularly Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, or the Persian Gulf. We know from cuneiform records that Mesopotamians traded extensively with a land they called Meluha, which most scholars identify as the Indus Valley region. Cuneiform tablets speak of Melihan ships, Melihan merchants, and even Melihan interpreters living in Mesopotamian cities. Imagine a Mesopotamian scribe meticulously recording a trade agreement, noting down the details in familiar cuneiform, and then, perhaps for the benefit of the Melihan traders, a summary or a key part of the agreement is also inscribed in the Indus script on the same tablet. Or perhaps an Indus merchant living in a Sumerian city like Ur used a seal that, for local understanding, bore his name or business in both Indus script and cuneiform. The discovery of such an artifact would have archaeologists and linguists worldwide popping champagne corks so vigorously it would create its own weather system. Have there been any tantalizing near misses or false alarms? Oh, certainly. Objects with Indus-like symbols, or actual Indus seals, are occasionally found in Mesopotamian or Gulf sites, attesting to the trade links. And a few cuneiform tablets might mention individuals with names that sound like they could be from Meluha. But so far, never a true parallel text, never that clear, unambiguous bridge. For a quirky tidbit, there are a few Mesopotamian cylinder seals that clearly belong to individuals who were culturally Indus, perhaps traders or emissaries. These seals might depict typical Indus animal motifs like the humped bull, and the owner's name is inscribed, but frustratingly, it's usually only in cuneiform. It's like they almost gave us the key, but then decided to just label it in a language everyone in Mesopotamia could already read. Thanks, guys, really helpful. The impact of this missing key cannot be overstated. It forces researchers to rely on the internal analysis of the script, those statistical patterns, the positional analysis of signs, and on trying to link the script to a hypothesized language family like Dravidian or Indo-Aryan. These methods are incredibly valuable and have yielded many insights, but they lack the certainty that a bilingual would provide. It's why, after a century of effort, there are still multiple competing decipherment claims, none of which has achieved widespread, definitive acceptance. It's what keeps the Indus script in the realm of the deeply enigmatic. Historians, and archaeologists, still argue whether the very nature of Indus society and its specific uses of writing made the creation of monumental bilinguals less likely in the first place. If writing was primarily used for economic administration, on perishable materials that are now lost, and for sealing goods, requiring only short, formulaic labels, then perhaps there was simply less occasion or need for the kind of public, commemorative bilingual inscriptions that provided keys for other scripts. Or, have we just been incredibly unlucky so far? Maybe that 1 in a billion artifact is still out there, patiently waiting beneath the dust for a keen-eyed archaeologist with a very lucky trowel. The hope, however slim, endures. Every new excavation season, every unexplored site, every re-examination of existing collections carries with it that tiny spark of possibility. Archaeologists are, at heart, incurable optimists. You have to be, to spend your life searching for needles in haystacks the size of ancient cities. The dream of finding that one object, that Indus Rosetta, that will finally break the silence of this great civilization, is a powerful motivator. Until then, the quest continues, fueled by ingenuity, perseverance, and the tantalizing mystery of those beautiful, silent symbols. Alright, so we've hit a bit of a wall with the whole Indus Rosetta Stone situation, or rather, the distinct lack of one. It's like being a detective at a crime scene where the main witness has laryngitis and the only clue is a cryptic note written in a language no one's ever seen before. Frustrating, to say the least. But when one door closes, a good detective, or a persistent bedtime history narrator, tries to peek through the windows. If we can't directly read the script, what other clues can we glean from the objects themselves and where they're found? This is where the rich world of Indus iconography, the pictures on the seals, and the archaeological context of these finds come into play. If the words won't speak, maybe the images and their surroundings will whisper a few secrets. Let's start with the pictures, primarily those found on the thousands of steatite seals. These tiny canvases, often no bigger than a postage stamp, are teeming with life. Animals are, by far, the most common motif. And pride of place, appearing on more seals than any other creature, goes to that enigmatic beast often dubbed the unicorn. You know the one, a horse-like or bull-like animal always shown in strict profile, with a single, long, often ridged or crinkled horn jutting forward from its forehead. It's usually depicted standing before a curious object that looks like a standard or a brazier, sometimes called a cult object or incense burner. What in the Harappan world was this creature? A mythical being central to their belief system? The totem of a powerful clan or merchant guild? A symbol of a specific deity or high office? The sheer ubiquity of this unicorn makes it a prime candidate for something incredibly significant. It's the ancient equivalent of seeing the same corporate logo everywhere you look. You just know it's important, even if you don't know exactly what the company sells. Then you have the magnificent humped bull, or zebu, with its prominent dewlap and powerful stance. These are often rendered with a striking realism and majesty. Does this bull symbolize strength, fertility, leadership, or perhaps a specific male deity? It certainly radiates power. Elephants, rhinoceroses, and tigers also make frequent appearances, depicted with an impressive attention to natural detail. These animals would have been familiar parts of the Indus environment. Did they represent different regions? Or perhaps different qualities or powers attributed to their owners? Maybe owning a tiger seal meant you were fierce in business. Or an elephant seal meant you had a great memory for outstanding debts. Probably not, but it's fun to speculate. You also find water buffaloes, antelopes, and occasionally composite animals, chimeras blending features of different creatures, like a bull with an antelope's horns or a three-headed beast. These fantastical combinations hint at a complex mythology and a symbolic vocabulary we're only just beginning to appreciate. Beyond the animal kingdom, human-like figures also appear, though less frequently than the star animals. The most famous of these is undoubtedly the image on Mohenjo-Daro seal number 420, often dubbed the Pashupati seal or Proto-Shiva. This mainstream historical fact refers to a specific seal showing a seated figure, possibly with three faces, though this is debated, wearing a horned headdress. In a yogic-like posture, Mulabandhana, some suggest, and surrounded by animals, an elephant, a tiger, a rhinoceros, and a water buffalo, with two deer or ibexes beneath the dais. Is this an early representation of the Hindu god Shiva in his aspect as Pashupati, the lord of animals? Or is it a shaman, a fertility deity, a divine yogi, or simply a master of beasts? A common motif in ancient art across cultures? The debate rages on, but this single seal offers a profound glimpse into Harappan religious thought. You'll also find other figures in apparent yogic postures, figures battling animals, or engaged in what look like ritual processions or offerings. Female figures. While very common as terracotta figurines found throughout Indus sites, often interpreted as mother goddesses or fertility symbols, are rarer on the seals themselves. When they do appear in narrative scenes on seals or tablets, They often seem to be part of ritual activities, sometimes associated with trees like the sacred peepal. The peepal tree, with its distinctively shaped leaves, is another recurring motif, clearly holding significant religious or symbolic meaning, much as it does in later Indian traditions. These narrative scenes, though not abundant, are incredibly valuable. Some seals depict processions of figures carrying standards. Others show a figure up in a tree with a tiger waiting below, a captured moment from a story we no longer know. There are scenes of apparent worship, perhaps offerings being made to a deity or a sacred tree. Each one is like a single frame from a lost movie, hinting at the myths, rituals, and beliefs of this ancient people. Imagine trying to reconstruct the entire plot of Star Wars from just a handful of random, silent screenshots. That's the challenge here. So, how does all this iconography connect to the script that almost always accompanies it on the seals? That's the million-rupee question. Does the line of script above the unicorn simply state unicorn? Or does it name the owner of the seal whose personal or clan symbol was the unicorn? Or is it a title, an invocation, or a short dedication related to the image? Researchers meticulously analyze statistical correlations. Do certain signs or sequences of signs appear more frequently with specific animal motifs than with others? For example, if the fish sign, remember our meme for fish/star, often appears on seals with, say, elephant imagery, that might suggest a link between whatever the fish sign represents and whatever the elephant represents. It's a painstaking process of looking for patterns, for non-random associations, between the visual and the, as yet unread, textual. Beyond the images themselves. The archaeological context, where these inscribed objects are found, can offer crucial indirect clues. Most seals and clay ceilings, for instance, are discovered in areas associated with trade, craft production, and administration, near city gates, in workshops, or what appear to be warehouses. This strongly supports the idea that the script, at least on seals, played a significant role in economic activities, marking ownership of goods, authenticating transactions, or controlling access to resources. Tiny inscribed tablets, on the other hand, are sometimes found in residential areas or specific workshop contexts, hinting at perhaps more personal uses, amulets, or specialized administrative tokens. Pottery marks, being widespread, suggest a more generalized use, perhaps for identifying ownership or the potter. The association with other artifacts can also be telling. If seals bearing a particular set of signs and a specific animal are consistently found alongside tools used for bead making, or near deposits of a certain raw material, it strongly suggests a connection between that inscription/iconography and that particular craft or commodity. Historians still argue whether the fine spots of seals can be reliably used to link specific seals to particular professions or social strata, or if the seals were too mobile or the contexts too disturbed over millennia to draw such firm conclusions. It's like finding a modern business card on the street. Does it tell you about the person who dropped it, or just the businesses in the area? This approach, trying to understand the general function or meaning through images and context, is sometimes called meaning without reading. Even if we can't translate the script phonetically, we might be able to deduce, for example, that sequence X on a unicorn seal found near a granary likely relates to grain administration or a specific official involved. It's not full decipherment, but it's a way of extracting valuable information. For a quirky tidbit, consider the ongoing debate about the unicorn itself. While it sounds very mythical, some scholars have proposed a more mundane zoological explanation, that it's actually a depiction of an aurochs, a large wild bull, now extinct, or a domestic bull seen in perfect profile, with one horn neatly obscuring the other. They point to the bull-like body and the way other animals are realistically portrayed. So, is it a magical creature from Harappan folklore? Or just a very artistically rendered bull that's a bit camera-shy about its other horn? The Indus artists aren't clarifying. It's like one of those optical illusions. Is it a rabbit or a duck? Except this one is 4,500 years old. Of course, interpreting iconography and context is fraught with its own perils. Symbols are highly culture-specific. What meant one thing to a Harappan might mean something entirely different, or nothing at all, to us. We risk projecting our own assumptions onto these ancient images. And archaeological contexts can be disturbed by later activity, or represent secondary refuse rather than primary use. Still, in the absence of that elusive bilingual key, reading the pictures and sifting through the soil for contextual clues are vital strategies. They allow us to build a richer picture of how the Indus script might have functioned within its society. What kinds of meanings it might have conveyed, and what messages, even if not fully translated, it might still hold for us. It's a reminder that understanding the past is not just about deciphering words, but also about interpreting the silent language of images, objects, and the spaces they once inhabited. You've patiently journeyed with us as we've tried to make sense of the Indus script. Not just by staring at the symbols themselves but by looking at the pictures they kept company with and the places they were found. It's like trying to understand a distant relative by examining their photo albums and the contents of their attic. You get glimpses, hints, and a feel for their world, even if you can't quite hear their voice. But all civilizations, no matter how grand, eventually change. Cities crumble, trade routes falter, and ways of life transform. What happened to the elegant Indus script, this unique system of communication, when its parent civilization began its slow fade into twilight? Did it stubbornly hold on, simplify, transform into something new, or did it just vanish? The mature Harappan phase, that golden age of well-planned cities, sophisticated crafts, and widespread use of the standardized script, lasted for about 7 centuries, roughly from 2600 to 1900 BCE. But as the centuries ticked over into the second millennium BCE, things began to change. This period, known as the late Harappan phase, roughly 1900 to 1300 BCE, with regional variations, was characterized by a gradual decline in many of the features that defined the peak civilization. Grand urban centers like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa saw populations shrink and civic standards decline. The meticulously planned streets and drainage systems weren't maintained as well. There was a general trend towards deurbanization, with people moving into smaller, more rural settlements. It wasn't a sudden collapse, more like a slow dimming of the lights. Why did this happen? Well, that's another great Indus mystery with no single, simple answer. It was likely a complex interplay of factors. It's a mainstream historical fact that climate change played a significant role. Shifts in monsoon patterns could have disrupted agriculture. The Sarasvati river system, often identified with the Gagarhakra River, which watered a vast area of Indus settlements, began to dry up. Tectonic activity might have caused earthquakes and altered river courses, affecting irrigation and trade routes. There could have been internal societal pressures. Perhaps a breakdown in political or economic structures. Long-distance trade with Mesopotamia declined. While the old idea of a massive Aryan invasion toppling the civilization is largely discredited, some localized conflicts or migrations of new groups into the region might have added to the instability. Whatever the precise cocktail of causes, the world in which the Indus script had thrived was undeniably changing. So, what was the fate of the script amidst this societal transformation? The general trend, alas, seems to be one of simplification, regionalization, and eventual disappearance. The classic, highly standardized Indus script, so beautifully carved on thousands of steatite seals during the mature Harappan period, largely fades from the archaeological record. You find fewer inscribed seals, fewer tablets. The intricate administrative and economic system that had likely relied heavily on this script was itself fragmenting, so the need for such a sophisticated, widely understood writing system would have diminished. You start to see more regional variations in culture, and this likely extended to any lingering use of symbols. For instance, in areas of Sind, the post-Indus Jukar culture produced pottery with incised geometric motifs. Some early researchers tried to see these as a devolved or simplified form of Indus script. But most scholars today consider them to be just decorative patterns or perhaps potter's marks, not true writing. Similarly, in the Punjab, the cemetery H culture, which succeeded the Harappan period in some areas, had its own distinctive pottery with unique painted designs, including some symbols, but again, nothing that can be clearly identified as a continuation or evolution of the Indus script as a linguistic system. It's as if the script, once a unifying feature across a vast territory, was now breaking into local dialects of symbolism or simply falling silent. The pressure to maintain that precise, standardized set of characters across hundreds of miles would have lessened as cities became more isolated and trade networks frayed. Imagine if, after a global internet collapse, every town started developing its own local emojis. That's kind of the vibe. This leads to a crucial question: did the Indus script transform or evolve into anything else? Is there a direct descendant, a linguistic offspring that carried its genes into later Indian history? This is where things get particularly murky. One of the most striking features of ancient Indian history is the apparent gap, a kind of dark age for writing, between the disappearance of the classic Indus script, let's say, for most practical purposes, by around 1700 to 1500 BCE, and the widespread emergence of the next major writing systems in India, Brahmi and Kharosthi, which appear around the 5th to 3rd centuries BCE, associated with the Mauryan Empire and the edicts of Ashoka. That's a gap of over 1,000 years. Some scholars, particularly those who lean towards an Indo-Aryan identity for the Indus language, have tried to bridge this gap by proposing that Brahmi script, the mother of most modern Indian scripts, evolved directly from the Indus script. They point to superficial resemblances between some Indus signs and some Brahmi letters. However, most mainstream epigraphists and linguists are skeptical. There are significant structural differences. The Indus script, as we've discussed, was likely logosyllabic, while Brahmi is an alpha-syllabary, where each consonant has an inherent vowel, and other vowels are marked with diacritics. The presumed phonetic values are, of course, unknown for Indus, making direct comparison of sound to symbol very difficult. And that 1,000-year chronological chasm, with a lack of clear intermediate evolutionary forms, is a massive hurdle. Historians, and epigraphists, still argue whether any resemblances between a few Indus signs and later Brahmi characters are purely coincidental, given the limited number of simple shapes humans tend to use for symbols. Due to some universal pictographic logic, or perhaps represent a very faint, indirect cultural memory or influence, rather than a direct, linear evolution. It's like seeing a few similar-looking bricks in a Roman ruin and a medieval castle. It doesn't automatically mean the castle was built directly from the Roman bricks without anything in between. So, if it didn't directly evolve into Brahmi, what happened? Could some individual Indus signs have survived, not as part of a coherent writing system, but as isolated symbols, perhaps as potter's marks? Religious emblems, or auspicious signs that eventually got absorbed into the broader symbolic vocabulary of later Indian cultures? This is a more plausible scenario. Symbols can be very tenacious. Think of the swastika or certain geometric patterns. They might lose their original linguistic meaning, if they had one within the script, but retain a cultural or decorative significance. Tracing these faint echoes definitively, however, is incredibly challenging. Why would a script that was used for centuries across such a vast area vanish so completely? At least as a full writing system? Its fate was likely tied to the fate of the societal structures that supported it. If writing was primarily an elite skill, used by administrators, merchants, and perhaps priests for specific functions like managing trade, recording inventories, or conducting rituals, then the decline of large urban centers, the disruption of long-distance trade, And shifts in social and political organization could have removed the primary need for or the ability to sustain literacy in that specific script. If the language, or languages, spoken in the region changed significantly over those centuries of upheaval and migration, an older script tied to an older linguistic form might simply become obsolete. And if, as many suspect, longer, more varied texts were kept on perishable materials, their decay would mean that the script's most visible presence, on seals, would fade as the economic system requiring those seals also faded. The script basically lost its job, and then, its voice. For a quirky tidbit, consider the intriguing, megalithic graffiti found in South India. On pottery associated with megalithic burials, dating from roughly the mid-1st millennium BCE and later, so overlapping with or even predating the earliest widespread Brahmi in some areas, archaeologists have found a variety of incised symbols. What's fascinating is that a number of these symbols bear a striking resemblance to signs from the much earlier Indus script. This has led to some very exciting, though highly debated, speculation. Could a tradition of using Indus-like signs have survived in some isolated pockets, perhaps in the south, for centuries after the script disappeared in the north? Was it a direct memory? Or a case of similar symbols arising independently? Or, more tantalizingly, could it suggest a Dravidian connection for the Indus script, with some symbolic legacy carried south? It's a very faint signal, a whisper across a vast gulf of time, but it's one of those things that keeps the mystery alive. The disappearance of the Indus script is not just a linguistic puzzle. It has profound implications for our understanding of early Indian history. It creates that long period of apparent illiteracy, making the transition from the Bronze Age Indus civilization to the early historic period of the Ganges civilization, with its Mauryan Empire and Buddhist stupas, much more obscure than it would be if we had continuous written records. It's like a chapter ripped out of the history book. So, as the great cities of the Indus slowly yielded to time and change, their unique script, once a vibrant tool of communication and identity, seems to have followed suit. It didn't shout its defiance, it whispered, faded, and perhaps left only the faintest of symbolic ghosts for future generations to puzzle over. The Harappans took their written secrets with them, leaving us to wonder about the last words ever inscribed in those elegant, enigmatic characters. So, we've traced the poignant fade out of the Indus script, a complex system of communication that seemingly dissolved into the mists of time as its parent civilization underwent profound changes. It left behind a tantalizing silence, a vacuum in the historical record. And you know what they say about nature abhorring a vacuum? Well, the world of unsolved ancient mysteries definitely abhors a vacuum too. When mainstream scholarship hits a wall, or when progress is painstakingly slow, that void becomes a fertile ground for, let's call it, creative thinking. This is where we take a slightly more whimsical detour into the realm of hoaxes, hopes, fringe theories, and the sometimes dubious decipherment claims that pop up around enigmatic scripts like that of the Indus Valley. There's an undeniable romance to an undeciphered script. It's a locked treasure chest. And everyone dreams of being the one to find the key, especially if that key could rewrite history or unveil some lost, profound wisdom. This allure draws not only dedicated, methodical scholars but also enthusiastic amateurs, imaginative speculators, and occasionally, individuals with a particular ideological axe to grind. The Indus script, with its beautiful symbols and the grandeur of the civilization that produced it, has certainly had its share of these more unconventional suitors. One common category of fringe theory involves the look-alike game taken to extreme levels. We touched on how early, serious scholars sometimes compared Indus signs to those in other known scripts. But fringe theories often throw caution, geography, and chronology completely to the wind. You might find someone claiming the Indus script is directly related to, say, the Rongorongo script of Easter Island, despite them being separated by half a world and thousands of years, with no plausible mechanism for contact. Or they'll see connections to ancient Cretan linear A, or Scandinavian runes, or even more obscure symbols from lost continents like Atlantis or Mu. The methodology usually involves picking a few Indus signs that vaguely resemble signs from the chosen, related, script, assigning similar phonetic values or meanings, and then, voila! A decipherment is born. It's a bit like finding a cloud that looks like a rabbit and another that looks like a hat. And then declaring you've discovered a lost meteorological language about haberdashery for bunnies. Then there are the mystical or esoteric interpretations. These often bypass the idea of the script encoding a mundane human language altogether. Instead, it's proposed that the Indus symbols are a repository of secret spiritual knowledge. Complex astronomical codes predicting cosmic events, or perhaps even messages left by ancient astronauts. The unicorn isn't just a clan totem, it's a symbol of a higher dimension. The fish sign isn't just a fish or a star, it's the key to understanding the lost art of underwater basket weaving from Atlantis. While these ideas can make for fantastic speculative fiction, they rarely engage with the actual linguistic or archaeological evidence in a rigorous way. Sometimes, decipherment attempts are driven by strong nationalistic or ideological motivations. The desire to claim the Indus civilization, and by extension its script, for one's own linguistic or cultural heritage can be a powerful force. This can lead to attempts to force the script to fit a preconceived linguistic mold, selectively highlighting any evidence that supports the preferred theory while downplaying or ignoring contradictory data. These interpretations are often more about modern identity politics than about dispassionate historical inquiry. Our quirky tidbit for this section definitely falls into the controversial category. And it involves the infamous horse seal incident. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, a researcher named N.S. Rajaram, arguing for an Indo-Aryan and Vedic identity for the Harappan civilization, presented photographs of what he claimed was an Indus seal clearly depicting a horse, a crucial animal in Vedic culture but, as we've discussed, notably rare or absent in genuine Harappan iconography. This discovery was used to bolster his claims that the Indus script was an early form of Sanskrit. However, sharp-eyed scholars quickly pointed out that the horse image appeared to be a distorted and possibly digitally manipulated segment of a broken unicorn seal. Specifically, it looked like the head of a unicorn that had been computer morphed. The ensuing academic firestorm was intense, highlighting how the desire to prove a particular theory can sometimes lead to highly questionable presentations of evidence. The claim was widely discredited, serving as a cautionary tale in the field. Outright forgeries of Indus script artifacts are less common than one might think, primarily because the genuine seals are made of fired steatite with incredibly precise and miniature carvings, making them difficult to fake convincingly by non-specialists. Moreover, the script itself is so poorly understood that a forger wouldn't even know what correct, long message to write to make a forgery seem like a breakthrough, such as a faked bilingual text. However, it's a mainstream historical fact that poorly made fake Indus seals do occasionally appear on the illicit antiquities market, usually aimed at unsuspecting tourists rather than serious collectors or museums. These are often crude soapstone carvings that vaguely mimic Indus motifs but lack the finesse and specific characteristics of genuine artifacts. The real problem is less about forged artifacts and more about forged interpretations of genuine ones. Why do these fringe claims arise and sometimes gain traction, especially in the age of the internet where anyone can publish anything? Confirmation bias plays a huge role. People tend to seek out and believe information that confirms their existing beliefs. A lack of rigorous methodology, an unfamiliarity with the vast body of existing scholarship, or a desire for fame or to dramatically overturn established paradigms can also contribute. And, let's be honest, sometimes these theories are just more exciting or romantic than the slow, painstaking work of mainstream archaeology and linguistics. Ancient astronauts taught the Harappans to write. is a much catchier headline than "Positional analysis of sign X suggests it may function as a grammatical suffix in a possibly Dravidian-related logosyllabic script." One of those definitely gets more clicks. Mainstream scholarship generally deals with such fringe claims by, well, mostly ignoring them if they lack any scholarly rigor or evidentiary basis. Peer review is designed to filter out unsubstantiated speculation. However, if a fringe theory gains significant public attention or makes particularly problematic assertions, like the "horse seal" claim, scholars may feel compelled to issue public debunkings to correct the record. Now, let's touch on the hopes part of our heading. While many fringe theories can be easily dismissed as pseudoscience, the underlying human desire to connect with the past, to solve great mysteries, and to understand our origins is a genuinely positive and powerful force. It's what motivates serious scholars too. And sometimes, just sometimes, an unconventional idea, even if ultimately proven wrong, might inadvertently highlight a real anomaly in the data or force mainstream researchers to re-examine their own assumptions or explain their positions more clearly. Historians still argue whether any truly valuable insights have ever emerged from the fringes of Indus script research, but the very act of questioning can, in a roundabout way, contribute to the broader intellectual ecosystem. The line between a bold, innovative hypothesis and an unsubstantiated fringe claim can occasionally seem a little blurry at the very outset. But the application of rigorous scientific method, demanding verifiable evidence and logical consistency, usually brings things into sharper focus pretty quickly. So, as you drift off, remember that the quest to understand the Indus script is not just a dry academic exercise. It's a vibrant, ongoing human story, complete with its dedicated heroes of scholarship. Its frustrating dead ends, its tantalizing clues, and yes, its occasional cast of colorful characters spinning yarns on the periphery. It's a testament to our enduring fascination with the past and our relentless desire to make the silent stones speak. Just, try to make sure the stones are speaking actual history and not just reflecting your desire for them to be alien telephone directories. We've had a bit of a laugh exploring some of the more imaginative, and occasionally downright outlandish, theories that have clung to the Indus script like barnacles to an ancient shipwreck. It's a good reminder that where mystery exists, human creativity, for better or worse, will rush in. But let's steer our ship back towards the shores of rigorous inquiry and look at the genuine, cutting-edge tools and approaches that might one day, finally, illuminate this enigmatic writing system. The quest to decipher the Indus script is no longer solely reliant on dusty notebooks and keen eyesight. The digital age has brought a whole new arsenal to the fight. Imagine archaeologists and linguists of the early 20th century, meticulously hand-copying each tiny sign from a newly excavated seal. Now, fast forward to today. Advanced imaging techniques are revolutionizing how we capture and study these artifacts. High-resolution photography and 3D scanning allow us to create incredibly detailed digital models of every seal, every tablet, every potsherd bearing those precious marks. You can zoom in on a sign no bigger than your pinky nail, rotate it, examine the carving technique, and spot minute variations that might have been invisible or ambiguous before. These digital archives can be shared instantly with researchers across the globe, fostering collaboration and allowing many more eyes to scrutinize the evidence. Techniques like reflectance transformation imaging, RTI, where an object is photographed under dozens of different light angles and the images combined, can create an interactive surface model that reveals subtle textures and indentations. This could be invaluable for clarifying worn or damaged inscriptions, making the faint whispers of the script just a little bit louder. And then there's the big one, artificial intelligence. AI and machine learning are already making waves in many fields, and the study of ancient scripts is no exception. Remember how we talked about computational linguistics and statistical analysis helping to reveal patterns like right-to-left directionality and potential suffixes? AI can take that to a whole new level. Imagine training a sophisticated AI model on vast datasets of known ancient languages and their scripts: Sumerian, Egyptian, Akkadian, Mayan. The AI could learn how linguistic information is typically encoded in different types of writing systems. Then, you could unleash it on the Indus script. It's a mainstream historical fact that AI is already being applied to undeciphered scripts, including Indus, primarily for advanced pattern recognition. It might identify subtle correlations between signs, or complex grammatical structures, that have eluded human researchers simply because of the sheer volume and complexity of the data. AI could also be a powerful tool for hypothesis testing. If a linguist proposes that a certain Indus sign has a particular phonetic value based on, say, a Dravidian etymology, an AI could rapidly check this hypothesis against the entire corpus of inscriptions. Does this proposed value lead to consistent and meaningful patterns elsewhere? Does it fit with known Dravidian grammatical rules when applied to other sequences? It's like having a super-fast, indefatigable research assistant who can cross-reference 1 million data points in seconds. Some researchers even envision AI generating potential decipherment pathways, suggesting possible meanings or phonetic assignments based on complex statistical relationships that are not immediately obvious. Of course, any such AI-generated hypothesis would need to be rigorously tested and validated by human experts. AI is a powerful tool, not a magic oracle. It can't replace linguistic intuition, archaeological context, or cultural understanding. And as with any complex tool, there's the garbage in, garbage out principle. The AI's output will only be as good as the data it's trained on and the assumptions embedded in its algorithms. This reliance on data underscores the critical importance of continuously updated, meticulously curated, and globally accessible digital corpora of all Indus inscriptions. The more texts we have, and the more accurately they are recorded and tagged with contextual information, the more powerful our analytical tools, human or artificial, become. Collaborative online platforms are already enabling researchers from different institutions and countries to pool their resources and work together on this massive puzzle. But all the fancy technology in the world can only analyze the evidence we have. The real game changer, the one thing that could eclipse even the most advanced AI algorithm, is new archaeological discoveries. The dream, of course, is still to find more texts, especially longer texts. Even a few more signs on average per inscription. Or a handful of texts that are significantly longer than the usual 5-sign snippets. Could dramatically improve the reliability of statistical analyses and provide much more context for identifying linguistic structures. Finding inscriptions in new contexts, perhaps what looks like a scribe's training area, or associated with specific industrial processes, or even, dare we dream, a temple archive, if such a thing existed, could reveal entirely new functions or subject matter for the script. And yes, the ultimate archaeological fantasy remains the discovery of that elusive bilingual or trilingual text, the Indus Rosetta Stone. Every new excavation season in Pakistan, India, or even in regions that traded with the Indus Civilization, like Oman or Mesopotamia, carries that faint, thrilling hope. Imagine a routine dig at a Mesopotamian port city, and a fieldworker unearths a clay tablet. On one side, clear cuneiform script. On the other, clear Indus script. The world would stop for a moment. Until that day, improved archaeological science continues to offer incremental but valuable insights. More precise dating techniques, chemical analysis of residues on inscribed objects, and even ancient DNA studies on human remains from Indus sites, which can shed light on population origins and movements. Potentially offering clues about linguistic affiliations, all add small pieces to the giant jigsaw. For a truly quirky tidbit regarding future methods, consider this. AI is already being used to distinguish subtle variations in handwriting to identify different scribes of known texts. Could a similar approach be applied to Indus seals? If AI could identify hands or workshops based on minute differences in how the same sign is carved on different seals, it might help us understand regional styles, scribal schools, or even trace the movement of artisans. It wouldn't decipher the script, but it would add another fascinating layer to our understanding of its production and use. Of course, with all this exciting new technology, especially AI, come new challenges. Historians still argue whether an over-reliance on black box AI algorithms, where the AI gives you an answer but its decision-making process is too complex to fully understand, could lead us astray. There's a risk of generating statistically plausible but ultimately incorrect decipherments if the results are not critically evaluated by human experts with deep linguistic and archaeological knowledge. Ensuring open access to data, tools, and research is also crucial to allow for independent verification and collaboration, preventing the field from becoming dominated by a few institutions with exclusive access to the latest tech. The future of Indus script decipherment will undoubtedly be an interdisciplinary affair. A symphony of linguists, archaeologists, computer scientists, statisticians, and perhaps even citizen scientists, all working together. Who knows, maybe one day you'll be able to download an app, point your phone at an Indus seal in a museum, and get a tentative, AI-assisted reading. Though, if that AI suddenly tells you the seal says, "Remember to like and subscribe," you might want to be a little suspicious. The path ahead is still long and challenging, but armed with new technologies and an enduring spirit of inquiry, the hope of finally understanding these ancient messages remains brighter than ever. The Indus people are still silent, but we're learning to listen in ever more sophisticated ways. We've journeyed together through the digital frontiers of AI, peered at ancient seals with the aid of advanced imaging, and dreamt of future archaeological digs that might finally unearth that one elusive key. The quest to understand the Indus script is a marathon, not a sprint, fueled by technological innovation and the unwavering hope of new discoveries. But as we near the end of our sleepy exploration tonight, let's take a moment to reflect on the script as it stands now. A profound, enduring enigma, a silent legacy from a civilization that shaped the ancient world. Why, after all this time, does this collection of undeciphered symbols continue to hold such a powerful grip on our imagination? At its heart, the fascination lies in that fundamental human desire to connect with the past, to bridge the vast gulf of time and hear the voices of those who came before us. The Indus Valley Civilization was undeniably one of the world's great early urban cultures. A contemporary of Egypt and Mesopotamia, sprawling across a vast territory with sophisticated cities, advanced craftsmanship, and extensive trade networks. Yet, unlike their Egyptian and Mesopotamian counterparts whose cuneiform tablets and hieroglyphic inscriptions have yielded so many of their secrets, the Indus people remain tantalizingly mute. Their script is the final, locked door to their minds, their beliefs, their stories. We can walk through the ruins of their cities, admire their pottery, and analyze their material culture, but we cannot directly hear them explain their world in their own words. This silence has a profound cultural impact. Our understanding of so many aspects of the Indus civilization, their political organization, their religious cosmology, their social structures, their myths and literature, if they recorded such things, is severely hampered. We are like archaeologists trying to reconstruct a complex society based solely on its physical remains, without the rich tapestry of written records that illuminate other ancient civilizations. The Indus script holds the potential to answer so many critical questions about early South Asian history. What languages were spoken in this vast area before the attested arrival of Indo-Aryan languages? What was the relationship between the Indus people and the later Vedic culture, or the Dravidian cultures of the south? What were the intellectual and spiritual foundations of this civilization that, even after its decline, left a discernible mark on the subcontinent? It's a mainstream historical fact that the Indus civilization's influence on later South Asian cultures is evident in things like standardized weights and measures, Certain artistic motifs like the people leaf and possibly some yogic postures, and perhaps agricultural practices, showing a thread of continuity even if the script itself did not directly survive. But the script could tell us so much more about the nature and depth of that legacy. The Indus script has, in a way, become a character in itself on the stage of history, an icon of ancient unsolved puzzles, sharing company with the mysteries of Stonehenge, the Voynich manuscript, or the Nazca lines. It's beautiful. Abstract signs are instantly recognizable, symbols of a lost world and a profound intellectual challenge. There's a certain weight to this silence. Imagine the frustration. But also the deep intellectual curiosity of scholars who have dedicated their lives to these symbols, knowing that within those tiny marks lie the thoughts, names, and perhaps even the poetry of a people from 5 millennia ago. And oh, the what-ifs of decipherment. If, tomorrow, a credible breakthrough occurred, what might be revealed? Would it confirm the Dravidian hypothesis, providing a direct link to a major language family still thriving in India today? Would it lend credence to an early Indo-Aryan presence? Or perhaps unveil a completely unknown language family, an isolate that vanished without a trace? Would we finally learn the names of Harappan kings or queens, if they had them? Would we understand the meaning behind the ubiquitous unicorn, or the Pashupati figure? Could we read their myths, their hymns, their mundane shopping lists? Perhaps the first deciphered Harappan epic would be about the heroic quest for the perfect carnelian bead, or a tragic love story between a potter from Mohenjo-daro and a merchant from Ladhao. The possibilities are endless and endlessly tantalizing. The script, in its undeciphered state, has also become a kind of mirror, reflecting back the concerns, identities, and sometimes biases of those who study it or claim to have deciphered it. The desire to connect it to one's own linguistic or cultural heritage can be a powerful motivator, highlighting how the ancient past is often recruited to legitimize or explain the present. This public fascination also leads to our quirky tidbit for this section, the sheer volume of enthusiastic, if often entirely unscientific, decipherment claims that land in the email inboxes of prominent Indus scholars every year. People from all walks of life, captivated by the mystery, will suddenly have a eureka moment, convinced they've cracked the code using everything from ancient Hebrew to Basque, to complex numerology, or even, as one scholar once wryly noted, by comparing the signs to patterns on their grandmother's tablecloth. While these rarely contribute to mainstream research, they speak volumes about the script's power to ignite the imagination. Of course, amidst all this, historians still argue whether the primary legacy of the Indus civilization, after its script faded, was carried forward mainly through its material culture and deeply rooted oral traditions that perhaps subtly influenced later societies, or if there might have been more direct, though as yet unrecognized, linguistic tendrils that stretched into the languages that came to dominate the subcontinent in later millennia. The script's silence makes it hard to trace these potential linguistic lineages with any certainty. It's the ultimate cold case, the clues are ancient, and the prime witnesses have been gone for thousands of years. Maybe the first thing we'll read, if we ever do, is a very elaborate "do not disturb" sign, left for future generations. And so, you find yourself now, at the quiet edge of this ancient mystery, the whispers of Harappa gently fading. The grand cities, with their ordered streets and bustling workshops, begin to recede into the soft haze of time. Those intriguing seals, with their unicorns and bulls, their tiny, precise symbols, grow dimmer in your mind's eye. The quest to understand them, to hear their lost voices, continues, a patient vigil kept by scholars and dreamers alike. The silence of the Indus script, in its own way, speaks volumes, of a civilization's rise and fall, of the enduring power of human ingenuity, and of the profound, timeless mystery of our shared past. The Indus River still flows, a ribbon of life through lands that once pulsed with an ancient rhythm, its waters carrying echoes of forgotten words, of symbols whose meanings dance just beyond our grasp. But even in their silence, these remnants offer a connection. A thread reaching back through the millennia, reminding us of the vast, intricate tapestry of human history. The lights of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa have long been extinguished. Yet the enigma of their script continues to flicker, a tiny, distant star in the vast night sky of our collective memory. Let that gentle mystery be a soft blanket for your thoughts tonight. The answers may still be buried deep, but the search itself is a journey worth taking, a quiet drift through the landscapes of what was, and what might yet be known.